The sun hung low over the California desert, casting long shadows across the sun-bleached terrain of Fort Irwin. Colonel James Iron Sullivan stood atop the observation tower, his weathered hands gripping the railing as he surveyed the sprawling National Training Center below. At 62, his once jet-black hair had turned silver, but his posture remained ramrod straight, a testament to 4 decades of military discipline. The desert wind carried the familiar scent of diesel and dust, smells that had followed him from the hedgerows of France to the mountains of Korea and the jungles of Vietnam. Below him, a formation of M1 Abrams tanks maneuvered across the terrain, their turbine engines howling as they executed precision movements. Sullivan watched them with a critical eye, noting their speed, their positioning, their teamwork. The modern tanks were marvels of engineering, faster and more lethal than anything he had commanded in his long career. Yet something was missing. It was something fundamental about tank warfare that these young crews, for all their technical proficiency, had yet to grasp. "Oh, still looking for flaws, Colonel?" The voice belonged to Major David Reynolds, Sullivan's aide for the past 3 years. The young officer handed Sullivan a steaming cup of coffee. Sullivan accepted the cup with a nod. "Not flaws, David, just opportunities for improvement." He took a sip, grimacing at the bitterness. Base coffee never improved, not in 40 years of service. Those boys down there are technically perfect, but technical perfection doesn't win tank battles. "What does, sir?" Sullivan's eyes narrowed as he watched the Abrams formation complete its maneuver. Instinct, improvisation, the willingness to break doctrine when the situation demands it. He paused, memories flooding back of a fog-shrouded battlefield in France, the silhouettes of German Panther tanks emerging from the mist. In Arracourt, we were outgunned, out-armored, and outnumbered. On paper, we should have been annihilated. But we won because we understood that tank warfare isn't just about the machine, it's about the men inside it. Reynolds nodded respectfully, though Sullivan could tell the young officer didn't fully comprehend. How could he? Modern warfare was conducted through thermal sights and laser rangefinders. The intimate brutality of tank combat, where success was measured in yards and seconds, where you could smell the enemy before you saw him, was becoming a lost art. Sullivan drained his coffee and checked his watch. "Time to meet our VIPs. Let's see if the old Hellcat crew still remembers how to report for duty." The briefing room in the command center had been prepared for the arrival of Sullivan's former crew. Maps of the training area covered one wall, while the opposite wall displayed historical battle maps of Arracourt, France, 1944. A restored photo of a M18 Hellcat tank destroyer had been mounted prominently, its crew standing proudly beside it. 5 young men with the casual confidence that came from surviving combat together. Sullivan stood before the photo, lost in thought. 40 years had passed since that image was captured, a lifetime ago in many ways. The young lieutenant in the photo, standing with hand resting on the Hellcat's gun barrel, barely resembled the man Sullivan saw in the mirror each morning. They shared the same determined eyes, perhaps, but little else. War and time had transformed him, as they transformed all men who endured them. The door opened, and Sullivan turned to see a familiar figure enter the room. Though his hair had thinned and his waistline had expanded, there was no mistaking the sharp, calculating eyes of Michael Rodriguez. The former tank gunner moved with the same deliberate grace that had made him the deadliest shot in the battalion. "Permission to enter, Colonel?" Rodriguez asked, a hint of his Mexican accent still coloring his words. Sullivan smiled. "Permission granted, Eagle Eye, though I believe you outrank me now." Rodriguez, now a retired lieutenant colonel himself after a distinguished career that had taken him from Korea to covert operations in Cuba, grinned and embraced his former commander. "Retired rank doesn't count, and you know it. Once my CO, always my CO." Before Sullivan could respond, the door burst open again, and a booming voice filled the room. "Well, look what the cat dragged in. The deadliest gunslingers this side of the Iron Curtain." Bobby Thunder Johnson entered with the same physical presence he had commanded as a young tank loader. Though now 59, the former master sergeant's powerful frame had lost little of its imposing strength. His dark skin was more lined around the eyes, evidence of years squinting in the sun at his successful gun shop in Georgia, but his smile was as wide and genuine as ever. "Thunder!" Rodriguez exclaimed, clasping the big man's hand. Still making enough noise to wake the dead, I see. Johnson laughed. Got to announce myself properly, especially when I'm in the presence of greatness. He turned to Sullivan with a respectful nod. Colonel, good to see you still standing tall. Wouldn't be standing at all if not for you boys, Sullivan replied, the memories of their shared combat experiences passing unspoken between them. The door opened again, more quietly this time, admitting Samuel Doc Miller. The former tank driver and combat medic moved with the careful precision that had characterized him since their days together. His yarmulke was now covered more by silver than brown hair, but his intelligent eyes remained as alert as ever behind wire-rimmed glasses. Gentlemen, Miller said, his voice soft but carrying the natural authority he had developed as a physician at the Veterans Hospital in Boston. I see we're all punctual as ever. He shook hands with each man, his grip firm but gentle, the hands of a healer rather than a warrior. Just waiting on Sparky, Johnson said, glancing at the door. As if on cue, Captain Richard Sparky Anderson burst into the room, arms laden with files and what appeared to be technical manuals. At 55, he was the youngest of the group, but his energetic demeanor made him seem even younger. His career path had taken him from tank mechanic to military engineer, and finally to a senior position at Lockheed Martin, where he helped design the next generation of anti-tank missile systems. Sorry I'm late, Anderson said, depositing his burden on the conference table. Had to stop by the motor pool. You won't believe what they've dragged out of mothballs for us. Sullivan's eyebrow raised. They found them already? Anderson grinned. 5 M18 Hellcats, just like you requested, in various states of disrepair, but they're real, and they're here. He turned to the others, excitement evident in his voice. Gentlemen, we're going to resurrect the Hellcats. For a moment, silence fell over the room as the significance of the moment settled upon them. 5 old warriors, reunited after decades, standing once more in the shadow of the machines that had forged their brotherhood in the crucible of war. Sullivan cleared his throat. Gentlemen, please be seated. What I'm about to brief you on is classified. He waited until they had taken their seats around the conference table before continuing. Operation Arracourt Redux is officially a historical training exercise. Unofficially, it's much more. He activated a slide projector, and an image of Soviet T-80 tanks appeared on the screen. 3 weeks ago, our satellites detected a massive deployment of these along the East German border. The latest version of the T-80 represents a significant leap in Soviet armor capability. Our intelligence suggests they have implemented a new targeting system that allows unprecedented accuracy, even in low visibility conditions. Rodriguez leaned forward, his interest piqued. Similar to what we were developing for the Hellcats back in '44? Sullivan nodded. Very similar. Too similar, in fact. Which brings me to why you're all here. He changed slides to show a map of the National Training Center. The Pentagon wants us to recreate the tactics we used at Arracourt, using restored M18 Hellcats against modern M1 Abrams tanks. They believe the principles we employed might be the key to countering this new Soviet threat. Johnson whistled low. Taking antiques against the most advanced tank in our arsenal? Those are some long odds, Colonel. The longest, Sullivan agreed, which is exactly why they've called us. We've beaten long odds before. Miller, ever the pragmatist, adjusted his glasses. There must be more to it than that, James. The Pentagon doesn't indulge in nostalgia. Sullivan's expression grew serious. You're right, Doc. There is more. He placed a classified folder on the table. The Pentagon believes the Soviets may have acquired the targeting technology we were developing at Arracourt, technology that was never fully implemented because of security concerns. Anderson's eyes widened. Project Longshot? I thought all the prototypes were destroyed. So did everyone else, Sullivan said grimly. But new evidence suggests at least one prototype survived and may have fallen into Soviet hands. If they've finally perfected what we started, he let the implication hang in the air. Rodriguez completed the thought. Then they've got a weapon that could change the balance of power in Europe. Sullivan nodded. Precisely. Which is why we need to understand exactly how effective these tactics can be against modern armor. If war comes, our tank crews need every advantage we can give them. Johnson crossed his massive arms. So we're the red team, playing the Soviets. With a twist, Sullivan confirmed. We'll be using American Hellcats to simulate Soviet tactics derived from our own historical experience. It's complicated, but then so is war. Miller frowned. And who will we be facing? Sullivan changed the slide again, revealing the image of a man in his early 50s, wearing the insignia of a major general. Despite the years, the features were instantly recognizable to all of them. Richard Harmon, Rodriguez said, a hint of tension in his voice. General Harmon now, Sullivan corrected, my former student and current champion of the air-land battle doctrine. He'll be commanding the opposing force, Blue Team, with the latest M1A1 Abrams tanks and all the supporting elements. Anderson whistled. Steele Harmon himself. He's been vocal about tank destroyers being obsolete. Claims speed and maneuver have been superseded by standoff capability and superior firepower. Sullivan's lips tightened into a thin line. Yes, he has, which is why defeating his force will be particularly satisfying. There was an edge to Sullivan's voice that his former crew recognized. The personal history between Sullivan and Harmon was complex, stretching back to Harmon's days as a young lieutenant under Sullivan's command. This isn't just about proving old tactics still work, is it, James? Miller asked quietly. It's about proving Harmon wrong. Sullivan met Miller's gaze evenly. It's about ensuring our military doesn't forget hard-learned lessons, Sam. Lessons written in blood. He took a deep breath. But yes, there's a personal element. Harmon has been pushing to decommission the last reserve units equipped with light armor in favor of more Abrams. If he succeeds, we lose a capability that might prove crucial if the Soviets attack. Johnson leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. So we're the old dogs teaching the new dogs some old tricks. I like it. Rodriguez nodded, his tactical mind already working. We'll need to modify our approach. Modern tanks have thermal imaging, stabilized guns, laser rangefinders. And we'll have refurbished museum pieces, Anderson added. The technological gap is enormous. Sullivan smiled, a hint of his old combat confidence showing through. The gap was enormous at Arracourt, too. German Panthers were technically superior to our Hellcats in every way. But we still won. Because we understood the fundamental principles, Miller said, warming to the concept. Mobility over armor, surprise over direct confrontation, teamwork over individual action. Exactly, Sullivan confirmed. The technology changes, but the principles remain. Our job is to demonstrate that these principles still apply, even against the most advanced armor in the world. The men fell silent, contemplating the magnitude of the task before them. Finally, Rodriguez spoke, his voice carrying the weight of a question they were all considering. Why now, James? Why bring us back after all these years? Sullivan's expression grew somber. Because we're running out of time, Michael. Intelligence estimates give us perhaps 5 years before the Soviets achieve military superiority in Europe. If war comes, it will be unlike anything we've seen before. Faster, more lethal, more decisive. Our tank crews need every edge we can give them. He paused, looking each man in the eye. And because there's no one I trust more than the men in this room. The simple truth of those words resonated with all of them. Despite the decades that had passed, despite the different paths their lives had taken, the bond forged in combat remained unbroken. Johnson was the first to respond, placing his massive hand on the table. I'm in, Colonel. Always was a sucker for a hopeless cause. Rodriguez nodded. Count me in. My shooting eye isn't what it used to be, but it's still better than most. Miller adjusted his glasses. Someone needs to keep you lunatics from killing yourselves. I suppose that duty still falls to me. Anderson grinned. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. The chance to get my hands on those old Hellcats again? That's better than Christmas. Sullivan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had known they would agree, of course. These men had never refused a call to duty, never shrunk from a challenge. But hearing their affirmations still filled him with a profound sense of gratitude and pride. Thank you, gentlemen. Report to the motor pool at 0600 tomorrow. We have a lot of work to do and not much time to do it. He gathered his materials, preparing to dismiss the meeting. One more thing. This operation is classified. As far as the world is concerned, we're simply conducting a historical reenactment for training purposes. As the men rose to leave, the door to the briefing room opened, and Major Reynolds entered, his expression urgent. Colonel Sullivan, sir, General Harmon has arrived ahead of schedule. He's requesting an immediate meeting with you. Sullivan's expression hardened momentarily before settling into a mask of professional neutrality. Very well. Tell the general I'll meet him in the command center in 10 minutes. After Reynolds departed, Johnson chuckled. Some things never change. Harmon always did like to make an entrance. Sullivan gathered his notes. Gentlemen, get settled into your quarters. Tomorrow we begin resurrection of the Hellcats. As the others filed out, Rodriguez lingered behind. James, a word. When they were alone, the former gunner spoke bluntly. There's more to this than you're telling us, isn't there? Sullivan hesitated, then nodded. The Soviets have been unusually interested in our historical archives lately, specifically records relating to Arracourt in the Hellcat program. Intelligence thinks they're looking for something specific. Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. The long-shot prototype? Perhaps, or information about its creator. Sullivan pulled a faded photograph from his briefcase, showing a team of engineers gathered around a partially disassembled Hellcat. Der Anton Keller, brilliant ballistics expert, defected from Germany in 1943, bringing critical targeting technology with him. Rodriguez studied the photo. I don't remember him at Arracourt. He wasn't there officially. His presence was kept classified. Only the battalion commanders knew. Sullivan's voice lowered. After the war, Keller disappeared. CIA thought he might have been taken by the Soviets during Operation Osoaviakim, when they rounded up German scientists. And now the Soviets are suddenly implementing targeting technology similar to what Keller was developing, Rodriguez concluded. That can't be coincidence. No, it can't. Sullivan placed the photo back in his briefcase. Keep this between us for now. The others have enough to worry about. Rodriguez nodded. Understood. But James, if we're really dealing with long-shot technology in Soviet hands, we might be opening a bigger can of worms than we realize. Sullivan's expression was grim. I know. That's exactly what worries the Pentagon. The command center buzzed with activity as Sullivan entered. Junior officers and enlisted personnel moved with purpose, manning communications equipment and updating situational maps. At the center of it all stood Major General Richard Harmon, his tailored uniform and ramrod posture creating an immediate impression of authority and confidence. At 50, Harmon retained the athletic build of his younger days, though his dark hair was now salted with gray at the temples. His face, once boyishly handsome, had hardened into the stern visage of command. As Sullivan approached, Harmon turned, his expression unreadable. Colonel Sullivan, Harmon said, extending his hand. It's been some time. Sullivan accepted the handshake. 5 years, General. The NATO conference in Brussels. Ah, yes. A thin smile crossed Harmon's face. You were quite vocal in your criticism of our armor modernization proposals. I expressed concerns about over-reliance on technological solutions at the expense of tactical flexibility, Sullivan corrected mildly. A position I still maintain. Harmon nodded, though his expression suggested little agreement. And now you have the opportunity to demonstrate your theories in practice. The Pentagon has authorized significant resources for your historical exercise. The slight emphasis on the last two words was not lost on Sullivan. Operation Arracourt Redux has strategic implications beyond historical reenactment, General, as I'm sure you're aware. Of course. Harmon gestured to a nearby conference room. Perhaps we should discuss those implications privately. Once inside with the door closed, Harmon's professional facade slipped slightly. James, let's be frank. This exercise is a waste of resources. The M18 Hellcat was obsolete before the Korean War. Putting it up against the M1 Abrams is like pitting a biplane against an F-15. Sullivan remained calm in the face of Harmon's dismissal. That's precisely the point, Richard. The technological disparity forces us to rely on fundamental principles rather than technical advantages. Principles that remain valid regardless of the equipment employed. Harmon shook his head. The battlefield has changed. Modern sensors, communications, and weapons systems have transformed the nature of armored warfare. Your nostalgic attachment to World War II tactics is dangerous if it influences current doctrine. Is it nostalgia to remember what works? Sullivan countered. The Soviets have studied our victories as carefully as our defeats. Their new T-80s incorporate lessons from both German and American armor doctrine. If we forget our own history, we give them an advantage. For a moment, a flash of the old respect showed in Harmon's eyes. Despite their differences, he had always acknowledged Sullivan's expertise. Your concerns about the Soviet targeting system are noted. Intelligence confirms they have made a breakthrough. But the answer isn't looking backward, James. It's accelerating our own development programs. We need to do both, Sullivan insisted. Understand our history while developing for the future. That's what this exercise is about. Harmon studied his former mentor for a long moment. You've assembled your old crew, the Hellcat legends, as I've heard some of the junior officers calling them. Sullivan nodded. Experience matters. Experience becomes dogma if not balanced with innovation, Harmon countered. Your crew may have been the best in their day, but their day has long passed. He paused, his tone softening slightly. James, I respect what you accomplished, but this isn't 1940, and the Soviets aren't the Wehrmacht. If war comes, it will be won with superior technology and firepower, not improvisational tactics from a bygone era. Sullivan felt a familiar frustration rising, but kept his voice level. The human element remains constant, Richard. Fear, confusion, the fog of war, these affect modern soldiers just as they affected us. Learning to operate effectively under those conditions is what separated good tank crews from great ones in my day, and it still does in yours. Harmon seemed about to argue further, then apparently thought better of it. We'll see what your exercise demonstrates. My staff will coordinate with yours on the parameters. But I warn you, I won't handicap my units to give your museum pieces a fighting chance. That would defeat the purpose of realistic training. I wouldn't want you to, Sullivan assured him. A fair fight isn't how wars are won. It's about creating favorable conditions through superior tactics and positioning. A ghost of a smile touched Harmon's lips. You taught me that a long time ago. You were an excellent student, Sullivan acknowledged. In most respects. The implied criticism hung between them, a reminder of old disagreements never fully resolved. Harmon had risen quickly through the ranks after leaving Sullivan's command. His career accelerated by both his natural abilities and his willingness to embrace the Army's technological modernization wholeheartedly, sometimes at the expense of traditional warfare principles that Sullivan held dear. Well, Harmon said finally, I look forward to seeing if your theories hold up under modern conditions. The exercise begins in 1 week. I suggest you use that time wisely. He extended his hand once more. Good luck, Colonel. You're going to need it. After Harmon departed, Sullivan remained in the conference room, thinking about the complex relationship between mentor and protege. Harmon had been his most promising junior officer, a natural leader with an instinctive grasp of armored warfare. But somewhere along the way, their paths had diverged. Harmon had embraced technology as the ultimate solution to battlefield challenges, while Sullivan maintained his belief in the primacy of the human element. The philosophical divide between them represented a larger tension within modern military thinking, a tension that Operation Arracourt Redux was designed to explore. But for Sullivan, it was also personal. This exercise would be his last significant contribution before retirement, his final opportunity to influence the direction of American armor doctrine. As Sullivan left the command center, the weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders. 1 week to prepare. 1 week to transform 5 aging warriors and 5 museum pieces into a credible fighting force. 1 week to prove that the lessons of Arracourt still mattered in a world of thermal sights and depleted uranium armor. It was, as Johnson had said, a hopeless cause. But hopeless causes had been Sullivan's specialty since that fog-shrouded morning in France, when a handful of lightly armored Hellcats had faced the might of the Wehrmacht's Panther tanks and emerged victorious. The motor pool at Fort Irwin was typically a hub of activity, with mechanics servicing the fleet of vehicles used in training exercises. But this morning, a section had been cordoned off, surrounded by temporary barriers that bore restricted area warnings. Behind these barriers, 5 tarpaulin-covered shapes rested in the early morning light. Sullivan arrived precisely at 0600, finding his crew already assembled and waiting. Despite the early hour, there was an energy among them, an anticipation that belied their age. Anderson, in particular, seemed barely able to contain his excitement, pacing back and forth while shooting frequent glances at the covered vehicles. "Gentlemen," Sullivan greeted them, "ready to meet our old friends?" Without waiting for a response, he approached the first vehicle and pulled away the tarpaulin, revealing the distinctive silhouette of an M18 Hellcat tank destroyer. Its olive drab paint was faded and chipped, its tracks worn, but the sleek lines and open turret were unmistakable. The 76mm gun pointed skyward, as if eager to be brought to bear once more. A collective intake of breath came from the assembled men. For each of them, the sight triggered a flood of memories of youth, of danger, of brotherhood forged in combat. "My God," Johnson whispered, approaching the vehicle with reverence. "It's just like I remembered, only smaller somehow." Miller chuckled. "We were younger then. Everything seemed bigger." Rodriguez circled the Hellcat, his expert eye assessing its condition. "Suspension looks original. Engine?" Anderson had already climbed partially into the engine compartment, his voice muffled as he replied. "Continental R975 radial, just like the original. This one's been rebuilt, but it's the same model. 9 cylinders, air-cooled, 400 horsepower." Sullivan watched as his former crew naturally fell into their old patterns, each man examining the aspect of the vehicle that had once been his responsibility. Johnson checking the gun breech and ammunition storage, Miller inspecting the driver's compartment, Rodriguez sighting down the barrel to check for alignment issues. "They're in better shape than I expected," Sullivan commented, "though still far from operational." Anderson emerged from the engine compartment, wiping his hands on a rag. "They've been kept in climate-controlled storage, which helped prevent corrosion. But you're right, Colonel, we've got our work cut out for us." His expression turned serious, "especially if we're going to incorporate the special modifications we discussed." Sullivan nodded, understanding the reference to the targeting system. "One step at a time, Sparky. First, let's get them running." He turned to address the group. "Gentlemen, we have 6 days to transform these museum pieces into functional fighting vehicles. We'll work in teams of 2. Anderson and I will focus on the engines and drivetrains. Rodriguez and Johnson, you'll handle the weapon systems and turret mechanics. Miller, I need you to coordinate with the supply office for parts and tools, then assist wherever needed." The men nodded, already mentally cataloging the tasks ahead. "One more thing," Sullivan continued, "we're being provided with a support team of mechanics and technicians. They're young, but they've been briefed on the special nature of this project and are eager to learn from experienced hands. Treat them well, teach them what you know." As if on cue, the sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. A small convoy of maintenance trucks pulled up, and a dozen young soldiers in coveralls disembarked, led by a female lieutenant. "Colonel Sullivan," she said, saluting crisply. "Lieutenant Sarah Collins, 77th Maintenance Battalion. My team has been assigned to your project." Sullivan returned the salute. "Lieutenant, thank you for your assistance. This is a somewhat unconventional assignment." Collins smiled, her eyes traveling to the exposed Hellcat with undisguised interest. "Getting these beauties operational again? It's a privilege, sir. Several of my people are military vehicle enthusiasts. They've been studying the M18 technical manuals since we got the assignment." Sullivan introduced his crew, noting with approval the respect with which Collins and her team greeted the veterans. There was none of the condescension or impatience that sometimes characterize interactions between younger soldiers and their older counterparts. "We've set up a dedicated maintenance bay inside," Collins informed them, gesturing to a nearby hangar. "Climate-controlled, with all the equipment you requested, plus some modern diagnostics that might help." "Excellent," Sullivan replied. "Let's get these vehicles under cover and begin assessment. We don't have much time." As the combined team began to move the first Hellcat toward the hangar, Sullivan felt a tap on his shoulder. Rodriguez had pulled him aside, his expression serious. "James, have you considered how we're going to handle the long shot issue? The technical documentation was highly classified. Most of it was destroyed after the war." Sullivan lowered his voice. "I've made arrangements. An archivist from the Army Ordnance Museum is flying in tomorrow with what remains of Keller's original designs. Between that and Anderson's expertise, we should be able to recreate a basic version of the system." Rodriguez nodded, though concern still showed in his eyes. "And if we succeed, what then? Are we actually planning to use an experimental targeting system in a training exercise?" "That's the idea," Sullivan confirmed. "If the Soviets have indeed developed their new targeting system based on Keller's work, then recreating our own version is the best way to understand its capabilities and limitations." Rodriguez considered this. "It's risky. The original Longshot had its stability issues under combat conditions. That's partly why it was never fully deployed. Times change, materials improve. Anderson believes we can overcome those limitations with modern components while maintaining the basic design principles. Before Rodriguez could respond, a commotion at the hangar entrance caught their attention. A staff car had pulled up, and from it emerged a familiar figure, General Harmon, accompanied by two aides. "Unexpected company," Rodriguez muttered. "Think he's here to check on the competition?" "More likely to remind us of the parameters of the exercise," Sullivan replied. "Stay with the crew. I'll handle Harmon." Sullivan walked over to meet the general, noting the way Harmon's eyes critically assessed the Hellcats being uncovered. "General Harmon," Sullivan greeted him, "this is an unexpected visit." Harmon turned his attention from the vehicles to Sullivan. "Just checking on your progress, Colonel. I see the museum pieces have arrived." "They have. We're beginning restoration work today." Harmon nodded, his expression neutral. "I've been reviewing the exercise parameters approved by the Pentagon. There's one aspect I find concerning." He handed Sullivan a folder. "The authorization for you to implement a historical targeting system replica in at least one of your vehicles." Sullivan accepted the folder, keeping his expression impassive. "It's an integral part of the historical accuracy we're trying to achieve." "Historical accuracy," Harmon repeated, his tone making it clear he didn't believe that was the primary motivation. "Colonel, we both know what system this refers to. Project Longshot was abandoned for good reasons. Even a replica could present safety issues. The replica will incorporate modern safety features while maintaining the functional principles of the original," Sullivan assured him. "Lieutenant Colonel Anderson is overseeing that aspect personally. His expertise in targeting systems is unmatched." Harmon's eyes narrowed slightly. "Anderson. Yes, I'm familiar with his work at Lockheed. Innovative, if somewhat unorthodox." He gestured to the Hellcats. "Just ensure that your historical enthusiasm doesn't compromise the safety of this exercise. We're using live ammunition in the final phase, as you requested." "Safety is our primary concern, General. Always has been." Harmon held Sullivan's gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. "Very well. I'll leave you to your work. My staff will be monitoring your progress. If there are any issues, I expect to be informed immediately." As Harmon turned to leave, he paused, looking back at the Hellcats. They really are remarkable machines in their own way, a testament to American ingenuity under pressure. It would be a shame to see that legacy tarnished by an unfortunate incident. The implied warning was clear. Harmon would be watching closely, ready to shut down the exercise at the first sign of problems. After the general's departure, Sullivan rejoined his crew in the hangar, where they had already begun the process of dismantling the first Hellcat for inspection. "What did Steele want?" Johnson asked, using Harmon's old nickname. "To express his concerns about our implementation of the Longshot system," Sullivan replied, "and to remind us that he's watching every move we make." Anderson looked up from the engine he was examining. "He's worried we might actually succeed." "Yes," Sullivan agreed. "I believe he is." Miller, who had been organizing tools and parts, approached with a clipboard. "James, I've inventoried what we have and what we need. The supply situation is better than expected, but there are still some critical components we'll have difficulty sourcing." Sullivan reviewed the list. "Prioritize the drivetrain and weapon systems. We can improvise on the less critical items if necessary." As the work continued, Sullivan found himself drawn to the turret of the first Hellcat, climbing up to sit in the commander's position. The metal seat was uncomfortable, the controls crude by modern standards. Yet sitting there, surrounded by the familiar layout, he felt a connection to his younger self, to the lieutenant who had led his crew through the fog at Arracourt. The world had changed dramatically since then. The nature of warfare had evolved, with new technologies creating ever more lethal battlefields. But as he watched his old crew work with Lieutenant Collins's young technicians, sharing knowledge gained through hard experience, Sullivan was reminded that some things remained constant: the human element, the importance of crew cohesion, the value of experience passed from one generation to the next. Operation Arracourt Redux was officially about evaluating historical tactics against modern threats. But for Sullivan, it had become something more personal, a final opportunity to ensure that the lessons he and his crew had learned at such cost would not be forgotten in an age of push-button warfare. As the day progressed, The hangar transformed into a hive of activity. The 5 Hellcats were systematically disassembled, their components laid out for inspection, repair, or replacement. Anderson had established a makeshift engineering station in one corner, where he was already sketching modifications for the long-shot targeting system, surrounded by technical manuals and historical documents. By late afternoon, Sullivan was reviewing progress with Lieutenant Collins when a commotion at the hangar entrance caught his attention. A civilian vehicle had arrived, and from it emerged an elderly man in a rumpled suit carrying a leather briefcase. Despite his age, which Sullivan estimated to be well into his 80s, the man moved with surprising energy. "That's our archivist," Sullivan told Collins, earlier than expected. He walked over to greet the newcomer, who was already surveying the disassembled Hellcats with obvious excitement. "Dr. Werner," Sullivan said, extending his hand, "thank you for coming on such short notice." The elderly man grasped Sullivan's hand with surprising strength. "Colonel Sullivan, the pleasure is mine. The opportunity to work with actual M18 Hellcats again is not something I could pass up." His accent was faintly European, softened by decades in America. "You have experience with them?" Sullivan asked, surprised. Werner's eyes twinkled. "Oh yes, though it was long ago and under rather different circumstances." He patted his briefcase. "I've brought everything that remains of Keller's original work as requested, though I must warn you, much was lost or deliberately destroyed after the war." Sullivan introduced Werner to the team, noticing the particular interest the archivist showed when meeting Anderson. The two immediately fell into a technical discussion that left most of the others bewildered. As the day drew to a close, Sullivan gathered the combined team for a briefing. The hangar's overhead lights cast long shadows across the partially disassembled Hellcats, giving the scene an almost theatrical quality. "Progress report," Sullivan said, looking at Anderson. The former mechanic straightened up, wiping grease from his hands. 3 of the 5 engines are salvageable with repairs. The other 2 will need complete rebuilds. Transmissions are in better shape than expected, though we'll need to fabricate some components. Lieutenant Collins's team has been invaluable in identifying modern equivalents for parts we can't source originally. Collins nodded acknowledgement of the compliment. "Weapon systems?" Sullivan asked, turning to Rodriguez and Johnson. "The 76mm guns are all intact, but will need extensive refurbishment," Rodriguez reported. "Recoil systems are worn, but repairable. We've located sufficient ammunition through the training command, though it's all practice rounds with reduced charges." Johnson added, "Turret mechanisms are operational in 3 vehicles. We'll need rebuilding in the other 2. We can have all 5 functionally armed within 4 days, assuming parts availability." Sullivan nodded, satisfied with the progress. "And the long-shot system?" Anderson exchanged a glance with Dr. Werner. "We've begun preliminary design work. Dr. Werner's archives are more complete than we hoped. With modern materials, we believe we can implement a functional replica in at least 1 vehicle within the time frame." "Good," Sullivan addressed the entire group. "You've all done outstanding work today. We're ahead of schedule, but there's still much to do. Get some rest. Tomorrow we continue at 0700. As the maintenance team began securing the hangar for the night, Sullivan noticed Dr. Werner examining one of the Hellcat's serial numbers, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Something interesting, Doctor?" Sullivan inquired. Werner started slightly, as if caught in a private moment. "Oh, just memories, Colonel. This particular vehicle served with the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion. It saw action at Arracourt." Sullivan's interest was piqued. "You can tell that from the serial number?" "Among other indicators," Werner confirmed. "The weld pattern on the turret is characteristic of the Buick production line from July 1944. These vehicles were rushed to Europe and assigned to the 704th just before the engagement." He ran his hand along the faded metal, almost reverently. "This very machine may have been there that morning in the fog." The thought was sobering, creating a tangible connection to the historical battle that was the foundation of their current exercise. Sullivan was about to inquire further when he noticed Rodriguez beckoning urgently from the hangar office. "Excuse me, Doctor. Please continue your examination. Any historical details you can provide would be valuable." Sullivan joined Rodriguez in the small office, closing the door behind him. "What is it, Michael?" Rodriguez handed him a message form. "Just came in through secure channels. For your eyes only." Sullivan read the message, his expression growing serious. Intelligence update on the Soviet T-80 deployment. They've moved an additional regiment to the border, along with a new command and control unit. He looked up at Rodriguez. They're testing something. Something they don't want us to see. The targeting system, Rodriguez suggested. Most likely, which makes our work here even more urgent. Sullivan folded the message and placed it in his pocket. We need to accelerate the timeline. How quickly can Anderson and Werner implement a working long-shot prototype? Rodriguez considered. With the right resources and around-the-clock work, maybe 3 days. But that's pushing it, James. Rushing experimental technology is asking for trouble. We don't have a choice. If the Soviets are preparing to field test their new system, we need to understand its capabilities before they do. Sullivan's expression was grim. Brief Anderson privately. Tell him we need a working prototype in Vehicle 1 within 3 days. I'll arrange whatever resources he needs. Rodriguez nodded, though concern showed in his eyes. What about Harmon? He's already suspicious of the long-shot implementation. I'll handle Harmon, Sullivan assured him. Just focus on getting that targeting system operational. As Rodriguez left to find Anderson, Sullivan remained in the office, contemplating the implications of the intelligence update. The timing couldn't be coincidence. Somehow the Soviets had learned of Operation Arracourt Redux and were accelerating their own timetable in response. The question was, how had they known? Who had informed them? Sullivan looked out through the office window at the team working on the Hellcats, his eyes settling on Dr. Werner as the elderly archivist continued his examination of the vehicles. The doctor's knowledge of the Hellcats was impressive, perhaps too impressive for someone whose background was supposedly in archival work. A suspicion began to form in Sullivan's mind, one he didn't want to acknowledge but couldn't dismiss. Could Werner be more than he appeared? Could he be the connection between Keller's original work and the Soviet targeting system? Sullivan pushed the thought aside for the moment. Suspicion without evidence was dangerous, especially with stakes this high. But he made a mental note to have Reynolds run a deeper background check on Dr. Werner. Just to be safe. For now, the priority was clear. Get the Hellcats operational, implement the long-shot system, and prepare for an exercise that was rapidly becoming more than just a historical reenactment. It was becoming a race against time, with potential implications for the balance of power in Europe. As darkness fell over Fort Irwin, Sullivan walked alone among the partially disassembled Hellcats. In the dim emergency lighting of the hangar, their skeletal forms cast strange shadows, like prehistoric creatures unearthed from the earth. Each vehicle represented a piece of history, a connection to a time when young men like himself had faced the might of the Nazi war machine with courage and ingenuity. Now, 4 decades later, a new generation faced a similar threat. Different enemy, different weapons, but the same fundamental challenge. How to counter superior numbers and firepower with skill, mobility, and tactical innovation. Sullivan placed his hand on the cold metal of the nearest Hellcat, feeling the connection across time. Still got some fight left in you, old girl, he murmured. Just like the rest of us. Dawn broke over the Mojave Desert, painting Fort Irwin in shades of gold and amber. Inside the maintenance hangar, work had already begun, the rhythmic clanking of tools creating a mechanical symphony that echoed off the walls. Colonel James Sullivan stood at the entrance, coffee in hand, watching as his team attacked the day's tasks with renewed vigor. 3 days had passed since their initial assembly. 3 days of relentless work, troubleshooting, and improvisation. The Hellcats were taking shape, their components being reassembled after inspection and repair. What had begun as 5 museum pieces was gradually transforming into a functional fighting unit. Sullivan's gaze settled on Anderson and Dr. Werner, who were hunched over a workbench in their makeshift engineering station. The 2 men had barely slept since receiving the accelerated timeline for the long-shot system, working through nights fueled by coffee and professional obsession. Their dedication was impressive, but Sullivan couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that had formed about Werner. The background check he'd requested had come back inconclusive, with significant gaps in the archivist's history. You look troubled, Colonel. Miller appeared at Sullivan's checkpoint, offering a fresh cup of coffee. Sullivan accepted it gratefully. Just contemplating all the ways this could go wrong, Sam. Miller studied his old friend's face. This is about more than getting these vehicles running, isn't it? Sullivan hesitated, then nodded. Intelligence reports the Soviets have accelerated their own testing schedule. They're preparing for something big along the East German border. And you think it's connected to what we're doing here? It wasn't a question. I think there are very few coincidences in this business, Sullivan replied. Someone knows about Operation Arracourt Redux and its true purpose. Miller's gaze followed Sullivan's to where Werner was explaining something to Anderson using elaborate hand gestures. You suspect our archivist. I can't rule it out. His knowledge of the Hellcats is too detailed, too personal, and his background has significant blank spots during the Cold War years. Miller considered this. What does your gut tell you? Sullivan sipped his coffee, considering. That's just it. My gut's uncertain. Werner's enthusiasm seems genuine. His technical knowledge is invaluable. But if he's not who he claims to be, giving him access to the long-shot system could be dangerous, Miller finished. Precisely. I've arranged for additional security measures. All design work is being documented and secured each night. Nothing leaves the hangar without authorization. Miller nodded approval. Prudent. But if Werner is working for someone else, he's already seen enough to be valuable. Their conversation was interrupted by a shout from the far side of the hangar. One of the Hellcat engines had roared to life, its distinctive radial engine sound filling the space. Johnson stood atop the vehicle, arms raised in triumph as blue exhaust smoke billowed from the engine compartment. First one's breathing, he called out, his booming voice carrying easily over the engine noise. A cheer went up from the assembled team. Even the youngest technicians, who had never heard a Continental R975 radial engine in operation, recognized the significance of the moment. After 40 years of silence, a Hellcat was awakening. Sullivan and Miller walked over as Anderson emerged from beneath the vehicle, his face streaked with grease but split by a wide grin. How's she sound, Sparky? Sullivan asked. Anderson wiped his hands on a rag. Rough, but she'll smooth out as the new parts bed in. All 5 vehicles have salvageable power plants now. 2 will need additional work, but they'll run. Timeline? 4 operational by tomorrow evening. The 5th will take another day, mainly due to transmission issues. Sullivan nodded, satisfied. In the special modification? Anderson's expression turned more serious. We've finalized the design, Dr. Werner's archives included more detailed schematics than we expected. We can begin installation on Vehicle 1 today, assuming the fabrication shop delivers the custom components on schedule. Make it happen, Sullivan ordered. I want a full systems test by day 5. As Anderson returned to his work, Rodriguez approached, carrying a clipboard. Weapon status, he reported without preamble. All 5 main guns have been inspected and repaired where necessary. We've test-fired the first 2 using the artillery range facilities. They're within acceptable accuracy parameters given their age. Good work, Sullivan acknowledged. Ammunition? 200 practice rounds allocated, 40 per vehicle. We've also been authorized 20 live rounds with standard charges for the final phase. Sullivan raised an eyebrow. Harmon agreed to live ammunition? After significant persuasion from the Pentagon, apparently, Rodriguez confirmed. They're serious about testing the long-shot system under combat conditions. Or someone is, Sullivan mused. Keep a close eye on the ammunition handling. I want every round accounted for at all times. Rodriguez nodded, understanding the implied security concern. As the day progressed, the transformation of the Hellcats continued. By mid-afternoon, 2 vehicles were fully reassembled, their engines operational, their weapon systems functional. Lieutenant Collins' team had proven invaluable, their enthusiasm and technical skills complementing the experience of Sullivan's veteran crew. Sullivan was inspecting the turret rotation mechanism on the second vehicle when Major Reynolds arrived, his expression suggesting urgent news. Colonel, we have visitors, General Harmon and a delegation from the Pentagon. Sullivan climbed down from the Hellcat. Expected? No, sir. They arrived by helicopter 15 minutes ago. Sullivan quickly assessed the situation. The hangar was a hive of activity, with components and tools scattered across workbenches. The long-shot targeting system was partially assembled on Vehicle 1, its experimental nature obvious to any knowledgeable observer. Inform Dr. Werner and Anderson to secure the long-shot components, Sullivan ordered. Standard cover story, historical restoration only, no mention of the system's combat potential. Reynolds nodded and hurried off. Sullivan turned to find Miller already at his side. I'll coordinate with Johnson and Rodriguez, Miller offered. Keep the focus on the standard restoration aspects. Thank you, Sam. Sullivan straightened his uniform as best he could, given the circumstances, and moved to the hangar entrance to greet his unexpected visitors. General Harmon arrived moments later, accompanied by two civilians in dark suits and a Colonel Sullivan didn't recognize. Harmon's expression was unreadable, but the tension in his posture was evident. "Colonel Sullivan," Harmon said by way of greeting, "I apologize for the unannounced visit. Events have necessitated an acceleration of our timeline." Sullivan nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "We're making good progress, General. 2 vehicles operational. The remainder will be ready within 48 hours. "I'm pleased to hear it," Harmon replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Allow me to introduce Deputy Director Wallace from the Defense Intelligence Agency, Dr. Harrison from the Office of Naval Research, and Colonel Peterson, who will be coordinating security for the final phase of the exercise." Sullivan shook hands with each man, noting the unusual combination of agencies represented. The Office of Naval Research had no obvious connection to an Army tank exercise. "Gentlemen, welcome to Project Arracourt Redux," Sullivan said. "I'd be happy to show you our progress, though I should warn you that we're in the middle of some delicate restoration work." "Of course," Deputy Director Wallace responded. "We understand the historical value of these vehicles. However, our primary interest is in the special modifications you're implementing." "So much for the cover story," Sullivan thought. "You're referring to the long-shot replica." "Replica is perhaps not the most accurate term," Dr. Harrison interjected. "Based on the documentation you have been provided, you're essentially recreating the original targeting system with modern materials. A functional reconstruction would be more precise." Sullivan noted the man's careful choice of words. "Whatever the terminology, the system is being implemented according to the approved specifications. We expect to begin testing within 48 hours. "That may not be soon enough," Wallace said, his voice dropping slightly. "We've received concerning intelligence regarding Soviet intentions. Their T-80 deployment is larger than initially reported and includes several vehicles with modified turrets that our analysts believe house an advanced targeting system." Harmon, who had been scanning the hangar while they spoke, returned his attention to the conversation. "The situation along the East German border has escalated. Intelligence suggests the Soviets may be planning a significant demonstration of force, possibly as early as next week." Sullivan processed this information rapidly. "You believe they're preparing to test their version of Longshot in a simulated combat environment?" "We do," Wallace confirmed, "which makes your work here all the more critical. We need to understand the capabilities and limitations of this technology before they demonstrate it." "I understand," Sullivan said, "but rushing experimental technology carries risks." "Risks we're prepared to accept," Harmon stated firmly. "The exercise timeline has been moved up. The final phase will begin in 3 days, not 6. Sullivan concealed his surprise. "That's a significant acceleration, General." "My team has been working around the clock as it is." "Then they'll continue to do so," Harmon replied, his tone allowing no argument. "National security considerations outweigh any scheduling concerns." Before Sullivan could respond, a crash from the far side of the hangar drew their attention. One of the younger technicians had dropped a tool tray, sending wrenches and sockets clattering across the concrete floor. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion somewhere more private," Sullivan suggested, gesturing toward the small office at the side of the hangar. Once the group was assembled in the cramped space, with Colonel Peterson standing guard outside, Wallace spoke more candidly. "Colonel Sullivan, we have reason to believe the Soviets have deployed a fully operational descendant of the Longshot system. If we're correct, it represents a significant shift in the balance of armor capabilities in Europe." Sullivan considered his response carefully. The original Longshot had severe limitations, particularly in adverse weather conditions. Even with modern materials, those fundamental design constraints would likely persist. "Unless they have solved the stabilization problem," Dr. Harrison countered. "Our analysis of satellite imagery suggests they may have integrated a gyroscopic stabilization system that compensates for the original design's flaws." "That would require a complete redesign of the original concept," Sullivan noted. "Yes, it would," Harrison agreed, "which is why we're so interested in your implementation. Dr. Keller's original design, updated with modern materials and possibly incorporating similar stabilization concepts, could provide invaluable insights into the Soviet system's capabilities." Sullivan's suspicions deepened. The experts before him seemed to know more about the long-shot system than should have been possible given the classified nature of the original project and the destruction of most documentation after the war. You have additional information about the system that hasn't been shared with my team, Sullivan stated, making it clear this wasn't a question. Wallace and Harrison exchanged glances. Harmon looked uncomfortable. There have been developments, Wallace acknowledged. Intelligence recently recovered materials from a former Soviet scientist who defected. These materials suggest the Soviets had access to more of Keller's original research than we previously believed. How much more? Sullivan pressed. Possibly all of it, Harrison admitted, including design elements that were never documented in official U.S. records. The implications were significant. If the Soviets had acquired Keller's complete research, including unpublished concepts, their version of the long-shot system might be more advanced than anything Sullivan's team could recreate from the archives provided. We need to know what we're facing, Wallace continued. Your exercise will provide crucial data on the fundamental capabilities and limitations of the technology. Sullivan processed this information, connecting it with his earlier suspicions about Dr. Werner. And the archivist you sent us? Where does he fit into this picture? Another glance between Wallace and Harrison. This time, Harmon intervened. Dr. Werner's background is complex, he said carefully, but his knowledge of the long-shot system is genuine, and his assistance has been deemed essential to the project's success. By whom? Sullivan demanded. By the highest levels of the Pentagon, Wallace stated. Colonel, I understand your concerns. Security has been a priority from the beginning, but I can assure you that everyone involved in this project has been thoroughly vetted. Sullivan wasn't entirely convinced, but recognized that pushing further would likely yield no additional information. Very well, we'll meet the accelerated timeline, but I want full disclosure of any additional information relevant to the long-shot system. My team can't operate effectively in the dark. Agreed, Wallace said, a little too quickly. Dr. Harrison will remain on site to facilitate information sharing and assist with the implementation. Sullivan noticed that Harmon seemed as surprised by this announcement as he was. The general's expression flickered briefly before returning to its professional mask. Then if there's nothing else, Sullivan concluded, I should return to my team. We have even more work to do now. As the meeting broke up, Harmon lingered behind, waiting until the others had left the office. James, this has escalated beyond what either of us anticipated, he said, his voice lower and less formal than during the briefing. The Pentagon is deeply concerned about the Soviet deployment, more concerned than they're admitting publicly. Sullivan studied his former protege. You don't trust Wallace. I don't trust anyone who appears this late in the game with convenient intelligence and sudden urgency, Harmon replied. But my concerns have been overruled. The exercise proceeds as directed. With live ammunition and experimental targeting systems, Sullivan noted, a potentially dangerous combination. Harmon nodded grimly, which is why I insisted on Colonel Peterson's involvement. He'll be handling security for the final phase, reporting directly to me. If anything seems off, he has authorization to suspend operations immediately. The implication was clear. Harmon was establishing his own safeguards, independent of Wallace and the DIO. Sullivan found this reassuring, even as it confirmed his own misgivings about the situation. I appreciate the precaution, Richard. My team will coordinate fully with Colonel Peterson. Good. Harmon paused, then added, for what it's worth, I still believe your approach is outdated, but I respect your commitment to the principles you taught me. Just don't let that commitment cloud your judgment if things start going sideways. With that parting advice, Harmon departed, leaving Sullivan alone in the office. Through the window, he could see the maintenance team continuing their work, unaware of the additional pressures and complications that had just been added to their task. Sullivan returned to the hangar floor, immediately seeking out Rodriguez and Miller. He found them inspecting the turret mechanism on Vehicle 3 and quickly briefed them on the accelerated timeline and the new security concerns. 3 days? Rodriguez shook his head in disbelief. The long-shot implementation alone will take at least that long to properly test and calibrate. We don't have a choice, Sullivan replied. The Pentagon is convinced the Soviets are preparing to demonstrate their own version of the technology. We need to understand its capabilities before they do. Miller frowned. And this Dr. Harrison who's staying with us? Another set of eyes watching Werner, or someone watching us? Both, most likely, Sullivan admitted. The situation has become more complex. The intelligence community is deeply invested in the outcome of our little historical exercise. Too invested, Rodriguez observed. Something doesn't add up, James. First, Warner appears with unexpected detailed knowledge of the system. Now Harrison arrives to assist with implementation. It feels like we're being manipulated toward a specific outcome. Sullivan nodded agreement. Keep your eyes open, document everything, and accelerate the timeline on all 5 vehicles. We need to be ready for the final phase in 3 days, with or without the full long-shot implementation. As Rodriguez and Miller moved to implement these new directives, Sullivan sought out Anderson and Werner, who were still working on the long-shot components. He found them arguing heatedly over a technical diagram. The gyroscopic stabilization must be integrated at this junction, Werner was insisting, pointing to a complex assembly of parts. Otherwise, the system will fail under dynamic conditions, just as the original did. Anderson shook his head. That creates a fatal resonance pattern in the targeting algorithm. Keller's notes specifically warned against this configuration. Werner's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise, quickly masked. You've misinterpreted the notes. The resonance occurs only when the firing solution is calculated under specific conditions that would not apply in our test environment. Sullivan cleared his throat, interrupting their debate. Both men looked up, startled. Colonel, Anderson acknowledged, we were just discussing the final stabilization configuration. So I heard, Sullivan replied. Dr. Werner, a moment of your time? The elderly archivist nodded, though Sullivan noted a hesitation in his movement. As they walked to a quieter corner of the hangar, Sullivan observed the man carefully, looking for any sign that might confirm or dispel his suspicions. The timeline has been accelerated, Sullivan informed him. The final phase will begin in 3 days. We need a functional long-shot system on Vehicle 1 within 48 hours. Werner's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. That is very ambitious, Colonel. There are complex calibration procedures that cannot be rushed without compromising accuracy. Nevertheless, that's our deadline, Sullivan stated firmly. Additionally, Dr. Harrison from the Office of Naval Research will be joining our team to assist with the implementation. At the mention of Harrison, Werner's expression changed subtly, a tightening around the eyes, a slight tension in the shoulders. Recognition, Sullivan thought, though the archivist quickly composed himself. Another expert will certainly be helpful, Werner said carefully, though I'm not familiar with Dr. Harrison's work in this field. He seems quite familiar with yours, Sullivan replied, watching closely for a reaction, and with Keller's original research, including elements that were never officially documented. This time the reaction was unmistakable. Werner's face paled slightly, and his hands, which had been gesturing animatedly during his argument with Anderson, became still. I see, the archivist said after a moment. That is unexpected. Sullivan decided to press his advantage. Dr. Werner, I value your expertise and the assistance you've provided, but I need absolute clarity about the long-shot system and its capabilities. If there are aspects of Keller's work that you've withheld, now is the time to share them. Werner seemed to age before Sullivan's eyes, the energy that had animated him draining away. He glanced around the hangar as if looking for eavesdroppers, then leaned closer to Sullivan. Colonel, there are aspects of the long-shot project that were deliberately obscured, even in classified documentation. Keller was cautious about certain applications of his work. What kinds of applications? Werner hesitated, then replied in a near whisper. The targeting system was designed not only for accuracy in adverse conditions, but also for a secondary purpose that was never officially acknowledged. It could identify specific frequency signatures in enemy armor, exploiting vulnerabilities unique to each vehicle type. Sullivan's eyes narrowed. A vulnerability exploitation system? That goes well beyond what was in the documentation you provided. Yes, Werner admitted. Keller feared this aspect of his work could be misused. He deliberately obscured it in his official reports. The implications were significant. If the long-shot system could identify and exploit specific vulnerabilities in enemy armor, it would represent a revolutionary advance in anti-tank warfare, even by modern standards. And the Soviets? Sullivan asked. Do they know about this capability? Werner's expression grew troubled. That, Colonel, is the question that has kept intelligence agencies awake at night for 40 years. Before Sullivan could press further, a commotion at the hangar entrance drew their attention. Dr. Harrison had arrived, accompanied by two assistants carrying equipment cases. The naval researcher was scanning the hangar with evident interest, his gaze settling on the partially assembled long-shot components. "We'll continue this discussion later," Sullivan told Werner. "For now, focus on the implementation as planned. Don't deviate from the approved specifications without consulting me first." Werner nodded, his earlier vigor seemingly diminished. "As you wish, Colonel. Though I should warn you, if Harrison is who I suspect, he may have his own agenda regarding the long-shot system." Sullivan filed that cryptic warning away as he moved to greet Harrison. The newcomer was already introducing himself to Anderson, examining the targeting system components with obvious expertise. "Dr. Harrison," Sullivan interrupted, "welcome to our operation. I understand you'll be assisting with the long-shot implementation." Harrison turned, offering a professional smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Colonel Sullivan, yes, I've been authorized to provide technical support and validation for the system. My team has brought additional equipment that should accelerate the calibration process." Sullivan noted the precise, measured quality of Harrison's speech. The man chose his words carefully, revealing nothing beyond what was necessary. "We appreciate the assistance," Sullivan replied, "though I'm curious why the Office of Naval Research is involved in an Army tank exercise." Harrison's smile tightened slightly. "My office has a long-standing interest in advanced targeting systems across all service branches. In this case, my expertise was deemed relevant to your project's goals." It was a non-answer, skillfully delivered. Sullivan decided not to press further, at least not in public. "Very well, Anderson will brief you on our progress. I expect your team to coordinate fully with ours. This is still my operation," to Harrison. "Of course, Colonel, we're here to support, not command." Harrison turned back to Anderson, effectively dismissing Sullivan. The subtle power play wasn't lost on Sullivan, who made a mental note to keep Harrison under close observation. He returned to the main hangar floor, where Johnson was directing the reassembly of Vehicle Force transmission. "Thunder, a word," Sullivan said, pulling the big man aside. "We have new players in the game. I need your eyes on them." Johnson nodded, understanding immediately. The new doc and his assistants. "And Werner. Something's off about his story, and it's becoming more evident by the hour." Johnson's expression turned serious. "You think we have a security problem?" "I think we have multiple agendas in play, and not all of them align with our mission." "Want me to have a private chat with some of these folks?" Johnson asked, flexing his massive hands meaningfully. Sullivan smiled despite the tension. "No intimidation tactics, Thunder. Just observe and report. Pay special attention to their interactions. Who talks to whom, when they think no one's watching." "You got it, Colonel." Johnson lowered his voice further. "What about the long-shot system itself? Still going ahead with implementation?" "For now, yes, but with additional safeguards. I want you and Rodriguez to review every component before installation. If anything seems off, flag it immediately." As Johnson returned to his work, Sullivan found himself watching the various groups within the hangar with new awareness. The maintenance team continued their tasks with focused determination, unaware of the complex currents swirling around them. Werner and Harrison were now engaged in what appeared to be a collegial discussion, though Sullivan noted the tension in both men's postures. And throughout it all, the Hellcats were gradually returning to life, ancient warriors being prepared for one final battle. Sullivan couldn't shake the feeling that these vehicles, and the men who had once crewed them, were being drawn into a conflict far removed from the historical exercise that had been initially proposed. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of activity. By nightfall, 3 of the 5 Hellcats were fully operational, their engines tuned, their weapons systems functional. The 4th was nearing completion, lacking only final adjustments to its transmission. The 5th, which had required the most extensive repairs, was scheduled for completion the following afternoon. Sullivan had arranged for security personnel to remain in the hangar overnight, ostensibly to protect the valuable historical vehicles, but in reality to ensure that no unauthorized modifications were made to the long-shot system. He had also instructed Rodriguez to document the system's current state before leaving, providing a baseline for comparison the next morning. As the team prepared to depart for the evening, Sullivan gathered them for a final briefing. The fatigue was evident on every face, but so was the determination to complete their mission despite the accelerated timeline. Tomorrow we begin installation and calibration of the long-shot system on Vehicle 1, Sullivan announced. Dr. Anderson will lead this effort, assisted by Dr. Werner and Dr. Harrison. The remaining vehicles will be brought to full operational status under Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez's supervision. Major Johnson will coordinate with the ammunition team to prepare for weapons testing in the afternoon. He paused, making eye contact with each of his veteran crew members. The timeline is aggressive, but we've faced worse odds before. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging. As the team dispersed, Sullivan remained behind, walking alone among the Hellcats in the dimly lit hangar. The vehicles seemed to watch him silently, their gun barrels pointed toward unseen enemies, their open turrets revealing the cramped fighting compartments where young men had once risked everything. Sullivan climbed into the commander's position on Vehicle 1, settling into the metal seat that countless officers had occupied before him. From this vantage point, he could see the entire hangar, including the secured area where the long-shot components awaited installation. The system represented a technological path not taken, a road abandoned due to concerns about stability, reliability, and possibly ethical considerations that Werner had alluded to. Now, 4 decades later, that path was being reopened, driven by fears of Soviet advancement in the same direction. Sullivan couldn't help but wonder if they were making a mistake. The original long shot had been abandoned for good reasons. Were those reasons still valid? Or had technology advanced sufficiently to overcome the system's inherent flaws? More troubling were the hidden agendas surrounding the project, Werner's mysterious background and unexpected knowledge of classified details, Harrison's sudden appearance with advanced equipment and unclear authority, Wallace's urgent insistence on accelerating the timeline based on intelligence that hadn't been fully shared. Something was happening beyond the stated purpose of Operation Arracourt Redux, something that had drawn the attention of multiple intelligence agencies and high-level Pentagon officials. Sullivan had the uncomfortable feeling that he and his crew were pawns in a larger game, one whose rules and objectives remained obscure. As he climbed down from the Hellcat, Sullivan resolved to proceed with caution. The exercise would continue as directed, but with additional safeguards and constant vigilance. Whatever hidden purpose might be driving events, Sullivan's primary responsibility remained to his crew and to the men who would eventually operate in combat based on the lessons learned here. The next morning dawned clear and hot, typical of the Mojave Desert in summer. Sullivan arrived at the hangar before sunrise, finding the security team alert and reporting no unusual activity overnight. The long-shot components remained untouched, according to the seals and monitoring systems Rodriguez had implemented. The maintenance team arrived shortly after, followed by Sullivan's veteran crew. Last to appear were Werner and Harrison, arriving together despite being housed in separate quarters. Sullivan noted this with interest, wondering what the two men might have discussed before reporting for duty. "Gentlemen," Sullivan addressed the assembled team, "today we implement the long-shot system on Vehicle 1. Dr. Anderson will coordinate this effort. By this evening, I expect all 5 Hellcats to be fully operational and ready for the testing phase tomorrow." Harrison stepped forward. "Colonel, with your permission, my team would like to begin calibrating our instrumentation for the long-shot installation. We've brought specialized equipment that will significantly accelerate the process." Sullivan studied the equipment cases Harrison's assistants had brought. They bore no official markings, unusual for government property. "What exactly is this equipment, to Harrison?" "Advanced calibration tools," Harrison replied smoothly. "Laser alignment systems, digital diagnostics, specialized software for targeting calculations, all designed to ensure the long-shot system performs to specifications." Sullivan looked to Anderson, who shrugged slightly, indicating that the equipment was beyond his familiarity. Werner, however, was eyeing the cases with evident recognition. "You've brought the Prometheus suite," Werner said, his accent thickening slightly with what sounded like excitement or alarm. Harrison's expression flickered briefly before regaining its professional mask. "You're familiar with the equipment, Doctor." "Werner?" "By reputation only," Werner replied, though Sullivan detected evasiveness in his tone. "It was developed for precision calibration of advanced targeting systems. I'm surprised to see it deployed in a field environment." An undercurrent of tension ran between the two men, visible only to those who knew what to look for. Sullivan decided to proceed cautiously. Dr. Harrison, your equipment is welcome if it accelerates our timeline. However, I insist that Dr. Anderson approve each component before it's integrated with our systems. Harrison nodded, though Sullivan noted the tightening of his jaw. Of course, Colonel, we'll proceed according to your protocols. As the team dispersed to their assigned tasks, Sullivan pulled Anderson aside. Watch them closely, Sparky, especially when they're calibrating the targeting algorithms. If anything seems off, shut it down immediately. Anderson nodded, his normally jovial expression serious. I'm on it, Colonel. I've already identified several components in Harrison's equipment that go well beyond normal calibration functions. They're implementing something more advanced than what was in Werner's documentation. More advanced how? Hard to say without further analysis, but the computing power they've brought is orders of magnitude beyond what's needed for a simple targeting system replica. Anderson lowered his voice further. There's something else, Colonel. The design Werner was pushing yesterday, with the gyroscopic stabilization, it's remarkably similar to patents I reviewed at Lockheed last year, classified patents related to next-generation anti-tank systems. Sullivan processed this information quickly. You think Werner has access to current classified research? Either that or the classified research is based on his work, Anderson replied. Either way, there's more going on here than a simple historical reconstruction. The implications were troubling. If Werner had connections to current classified weapons development, his presence on this project took on new significance. And if Harrison's equipment was capable of implementing advanced functions beyond the original long-shot specifications, the entire nature of the exercise might be changing without Sullivan's knowledge or consent. Limit their access to Vehicle 1 only, Sullivan decided. The other Hellcats remain configured according to original specifications. At least then we'll have a control group for comparison. Anderson nodded agreement. Smart move. I'll make sure the modifications remain isolated to the first vehicle. As Anderson rejoined the technical team, Sullivan sought out Miller, who was reviewing medical protocols for the upcoming live-fire exercise. Sam, I need a favor, Sullivan said without preamble. Something off the books. Miller looked up, immediately alert to his friend's serious tone. Name it. I need you to contact some of your connections at Walter Reed. See if they can run a discreet background check on our guests, particularly their medical and scientific histories. Nothing official, just colleague-to-colleague inquiries. Miller considered this for a moment, then nodded. I know some people who might help. What exactly am I looking for? Anything that connects Werner or Harrison to advanced weapons development, particularly targeting systems, and any gaps in their official biographies that might suggest classified work or foreign connections. You suspect they're not who they claim to be, Miller stated. I'm certain they're not, Sullivan replied. The question is, who are they really working for, and what's their actual objective here? Miller promised to make the calls, and Sullivan moved on to check on the other vehicle's progress. Johnson and Rodriguez had organized the maintenance team into efficient units, each focused on specific aspects of the remaining Hellcats. The sounds of engines being tuned, tracks being adjusted, and weapon systems being cycled filled the hangar with mechanical symphony. By midday, all 5 vehicles were mechanically operational, a remarkable achievement given the timeline and the age of the equipment. Sullivan ordered a brief pause for lunch, using the opportunity to observe the interactions between various team members. Harrison and his assistants kept to themselves, speaking in low voices while frequently glancing toward Vehicle 1, where the long-shot installation was progressing. Werner alternated between assisting with the installation and engaging in what appeared to be casual conversation with various maintenance team members, though Sullivan noted that his questions often focused on specific technical aspects of the Hellcat's restoration. As the afternoon progressed, the long-shot installation reached a critical phase. The targeting system's core components had been mounted in Vehicle 1's turret, and Harrison's team was connecting their specialized equipment for calibration. Anderson supervised every connection, frequently consulting the original documentation and making careful notes. Sullivan was discussing ammunition allocation with Rodriguez when Major Reynolds appeared at the hangar entrance, gesturing urgently. Sullivan excused himself and joined his aide outside. Colonel, we have a situation, Reynolds reported in a low voice. Security detected an unauthorized transmission from within the hangar complex approximately 30 minutes ago. Encrypted, directed toward a satellite typically used for diplomatic communications. Sullivan's expression hardened. Source? Unconfirmed. The transmission was brief and used sophisticated encryption. Our security team is analyzing it now, but preliminary assessment suggests it originated from one of the technical workstations. Harrison's equipment, Sullivan surmised. Possibly, or one of several other devices currently in operation. Reynolds hesitated, then added, "There's more, sir. General Harmon called an hour ago. He wanted to inform you that the Pentagon has authorized additional observers for the final phase tomorrow. Representatives from several allied nations will be present." This was unexpected and concerning. Which nations? Britain, France, Germany, and Israel. All NATO allies are close partners. Sullivan considered the implications. The presence of foreign observers transformed what had been a classified American exercise into an international demonstration. The stakes had just been raised significantly. Harmon didn't sound happy about it, Reynolds added, said it was pushed through channels above his authority. Wallace is doing, most likely, Sullivan mused. The DIA is turning our historical exercise into a technological showcase. For what purpose, sir? That's what I intend to find out. Sullivan's decision was immediate. Increase security around the hangar. No one enters or leaves without direct authorization from me. All communications are to be monitored and recorded. And inform the team that we'll be working through the night to ensure all vehicles are fully operational for tomorrow's demonstration. As Reynolds departed to implement these measures, Sullivan returned to the hangar, his senses heightened. Someone within the operation was communicating with outside parties, sharing information about the long-shot implementation. Whether for intelligence purposes or something more concerning remained to be seen. Sullivan approached Vehicle 1, where Anderson was supervising the final connections between Harrison's equipment and the long-shot targeting system. The naval researcher and his assistants were focused intently on a laptop display showing complex waveforms and numerical data. "Status report," Sullivan requested. Anderson looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Final calibration sequence underway, Colonel. The system is responding within expected parameters, though we've had to make some adjustments to account for the age of the vehicle platform." Harrison added without looking up from his display, "The targeting algorithms are performing exceptionally well in simulation, better than expected, in fact. We should be ready for live testing within 2 hours." Sullivan noticed Werner standing slightly apart, watching the proceedings with an unreadable expression. The elderly archivist seemed troubled, his earlier enthusiasm notably diminished. "Dr. Werner, your assessment?" Sullivan prompted. Werner started slightly, as if pulled from deep thought. "The implementation is proceeding as designed, Colonel, though I have some concerns about the stability protocols being employed. They deviate somewhat from Keller's original specifications." Harrison looked up sharply. "The deviations are necessary adaptations to account for the materials and computing power available to us. The fundamental principles remain unchanged." "Perhaps," Werner conceded, though his tone suggested disagreement. "But Keller was very specific about certain safety limitations that should not be exceeded." An undercurrent of tension ran between the two men, visible in their body language and the careful precision of their words. Sullivan sensed they were talking around something, using technical terminology to mask a deeper disagreement. "Will the system be safe for testing tomorrow?" Sullivan asked directly. "Absolutely," Harrison assured him quickly. "Within normal parameters," Werner added more cautiously, "provided the targeting protocols are not pushed beyond their design limitations." Sullivan looked to Anderson for clarification. His engineer considered for a moment before responding. "The system will function as intended for the demonstration," Anderson stated carefully. "But I share Dr. Werner's concerns about some of the protocols Dr. Harrison has implemented. They maximize performance at the expense of safety margins." Harrison's expression tightened. "Those safety margins were excessively conservative in the original design. Modern materials and computing power allow us to operate safely at higher performance levels." "That remains to be proven," Werner countered. "Keller established those limitations after extensive testing. Exceeding them introduces unpredictable variables." Sullivan raised a hand, cutting off the technical debate. "I want a full safety review before any live-fire testing tomorrow. Anderson, you'll conduct that review with input from both Werner and Harrison. If there are any doubts about system stability, We revert to standard targeting procedures. Harrison looked as if he might object, but apparently thought better of it. Of course, Colonel, safety is paramount. As Sullivan moved away to check on the other vehicles, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The exercise had evolved far beyond its original parameters, becoming a high-stakes demonstration of technology that was simultaneously 40 years old and cutting-edge modern. The presence of foreign observers added another layer of complexity. If the long-shot system performed as Harrison expected, it would demonstrate capabilities that might shift the balance of tank warfare significantly. If it failed, or worse, malfunctioned dangerously, the consequences could be diplomatically embarrassing and potentially harmful to American military credibility. Sullivan found Rodriguez inspecting the ammunition that had been delivered for tomorrow's testing. The former gunner looked up as Sullivan approached. 20 live rounds with standard charges as authorized, Rodriguez reported, plus the practice rounds for the initial phase, all accounted for and secured. Good, Sullivan lowered his voice. Michael, we have complications. Foreign observers will be present tomorrow, and there's evidence of unauthorized communications from within the operation. Rodriguez's expression darkened. Someone's feeding information to outside parties. It appears so, and given the accelerated timeline and sudden international interest, I suspect we're being maneuvered towards some predetermined outcome. The long-shot demonstration, Rodriguez surmised. Sullivan nodded. Harrison's modifications go beyond historical reconstruction. He's implementing something more advanced, possibly based on current classified research. And Werner knows more about it than he's admitting. Rodriguez considered this information. You think they're working together or against each other? That's the question, Sullivan admitted. Their technical disagreements seem genuine, but both men have hidden agendas, and both have expertise that goes beyond what their official roles would suggest. What's our play? Sullivan's decision was firm. We proceed with the exercise as planned, but with maximum security and oversight. You'll personally verify every round before it's loaded. Johnson will remain with Vehicle 1 at all times during the demonstration. Miller will coordinate with medical personnel in case of incidents. And you? I'll be commanding Vehicle 1 during the live fire phase. Sullivan's expression was resolute. If there are unexpected consequences from the long-shot system, I want to be the one experiencing them firsthand. Rodriguez nodded, understanding. Sullivan had never asked his men to take risks he wouldn't face himself. Just like old times, Rodriguez said with a grim smile. Heading into uncertainty with questionable intelligence and unclear objectives. Exactly like old times, Sullivan agreed. Except now, we're the old dogs trying to keep up with new tricks. As evening approached, the preparation tempo increased. All 5 Hellcats were now fully operational, their engines tuned, their weapons systems verified. The maintenance team had performed minor miracles, transforming museum pieces into functional fighting vehicles in less than a week. Vehicle 1 stood apart from the others, distinguished by the long-shot system, now integrated into its targeting mechanisms. Harrison's team had connected their specialized equipment for final calibration, filling the turret with a complex array of digital displays and sensor equipment that contrasted sharply with the Hellcat's World War II vintage controls. Sullivan gathered the entire team for a final briefing before the night shift began. Despite the long hours and accelerated timeline, morale remained high. There was a sense of accomplishment in having brought the Hellcats back to life, a connection to history that transcended the political and intelligence complications surrounding the project. Tomorrow at 0800, we begin the demonstration phase of Operation Arracourt Redux, Sullivan announced. The exercise will proceed in 3 stages. First, a mobility demonstration showing the Hellcat's speed and maneuverability. Second, a stationary firing demonstration using practice rounds. Finally, the live fire phase, where we'll test the vehicles against moving targets in simulated combat conditions. He paused, making eye contact with each member of his veteran crew. This exercise has evolved beyond its original parameters. The presence of foreign observers and the accelerated timeline reflect the importance attached to our work here. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you all to know that what you've accomplished this week is remarkable. You've not only restored these historic vehicles, you've preserved the knowledge and experience they represent. There was a moment of silence as the significance of his words settled over the team. Then Johnson spoke up, his deep voice carrying easily through the hangar. "Colonel, I think I speak for all of us when I say it's been an honor to serve with you again. Whatever happens tomorrow, the Hellcat legends are ready." A murmur of agreement ran through the group, accompanied by nods from the younger maintenance team members who had come to respect the veterans they'd worked alongside. "Very well," Sullivan concluded. "Night shift personnel will continue calibration and final preparations. Everyone else, get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging." As the team dispersed, Miller approached Sullivan with a concerned expression. "James, I've heard back from my contacts at Walter Reed. The information is troubling." Sullivan led Miller to a quiet corner of the hangar. "What did you learn?" "Dr. Werner's background is more complex than we imagined. He's not simply an archivist, barman. According to my sources, he worked on advanced targeting systems for the Army Ballistic Research Laboratory in the 1950s and 60s. Then his record goes dark for nearly a decade, suggesting classified work or possibly a deep cover assignment. And Harrison? Even more interesting, he's legitimate ONR, but his specialty isn't conventional targeting systems. He's a pioneer in what they're calling vulnerability exploitation technology, complex systems designed to identify and target specific weaknesses in enemy equipment." Sullivan connected this with what Werner had told him earlier about Keller's hidden work. So both men have expertise related to the Longshot's alleged secondary capability, the ability to identify and exploit specific vulnerabilities in enemy armor. "Exactly," Miller confirmed, "which suggests tomorrow's demonstration may have a purpose beyond historical recreation or conventional targeting improvement." "They're testing the vulnerability exploitation aspect," Sullivan concluded, "using our Hellcats as a platform for technology that could fundamentally change tank warfare." Miller nodded grimly. "And they've arranged for international observers to witness it. The question is why? What's the strategic purpose of revealing such capability now?" Sullivan had no immediate answer, but the implications were troubling. Advanced targeting technology that could identify and exploit specific vulnerabilities in enemy armor would represent a significant military advantage. Demonstrating such technology in front of foreign observers might be intended as a deterrent, a way of signaling American technological superiority without revealing the full details. Or it might have a more complex diplomatic purpose, perhaps related to ongoing arms control negotiations or alliance politics. Whatever the case, Sullivan and his crew had become unwitting participants in a high-stakes technological and geopolitical demonstration. As midnight approached, Sullivan walked alone among the Hellcats, now fully restored and prepared for tomorrow's exercise. In the dim lighting of the hangar, they resembled sleeping predators, their gun barrels pointed skyward, their open turrets revealing the cramped fighting compartments where men had once risked everything. Tomorrow, these historic vehicles would once again roar into action, carrying not only their five-man crews, but also the weight of international attention and complex strategic agendas. Sullivan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into something larger and potentially more dangerous than anyone had initially disclosed. Yet despite the complications and hidden agendas, there was a purity to the core mission, demonstrating that the fundamental principles of tank warfare, the lessons learned in the fog of Arracourt, remain valid even in an age of digital targeting and composite armor. Speed, surprise, maneuver, crew coordination, these human elements of combat transcended technological evolution. As Sullivan climbed into the commander's position on Vehicle 1, settling into the metal seat that countless officers had occupied before him, he felt a connection to those long-ago battles. Whatever happened tomorrow, the Hellcats and the men who had fought in them would have one more opportunity to demonstrate their value, to pass their hard-earned wisdom to a new generation of warriors. With that thought providing some measure of peace, Sullivan prepared for the challenges that the dawn would bring. The night shift continued their work around him, fine-tuning engines, calibrating weapons, preparing for a demonstration that had become far more significant than a simple historical exercise. Tomorrow, Operation Arracourt Redux would enter its final phase, bringing together the past and future of armored warfare in ways that none of its participants had fully anticipated. Sullivan could only hope that the outcome would justify the risks and complexities that had gathered around this strange resurrection of World War II tank destroyers in the modern era. Dawn broke over the Mojave Desert, painting the barren landscape in shades of gold and amber. A thin layer of fog hugged the ground, an unusual meteorological phenomenon that had Colonel James Sullivan staring into the distance with a sense of déjà vu. The conditions were eerily similar to those at Arracourt 4 decades earlier, when a handful of Hellcats had faced down the might of Nazi Germany's armored divisions. Sullivan stood atop the observation tower, watching as final preparations were made on the testing grounds below. 5 restored M18 Hellcats were positioned in a neat row, their engines idling, thin trails of exhaust rising into the morning air. Around them, technical crews made last-minute adjustments, checked communication equipment, and verified safety protocols. Weather report says the fog should burn off within the hour, Major Reynolds said, joining Sullivan on the platform. Unusual for this time of year. Very, Sullivan agreed, his voice thoughtful. Almost as if history is repeating itself. Reynolds handed him a clipboard. Final verification checklist, sir. All 5 vehicles are operational and ready for demonstration. Vehicle 1's special modifications have been approved by Dr. Anderson, with noted reservations about certain parameters. Sullivan reviewed the document, noting Anderson's careful documentation of his concerns regarding the Longshot system's calibration. The engineer had signed off on the safety protocols, but had clearly indicated his disagreement with Harrison's more aggressive performance settings. Our observers have arrived, Reynolds continued. They're being briefed in the command center now. General Harmon is personally overseeing security arrangements. Sullivan nodded, returning the clipboard. And our guests of honor? De Werner is already in the maintenance hangar, making what he calls final adjustments to Vehicle 1. Dr. Harrison and his team are setting up additional monitoring equipment near the firing line. Colonel Peterson has personnel observing both. Good. Maintain surveillance, but discreetly. I don't want anyone feeling like they're under suspicion, even if they are. Sullivan checked his watch. Inform the team we begin in 30 minutes. I'll meet them at the starting position. As Reynolds departed, Sullivan remained on the tower, scanning the testing grounds with experienced eyes. The course had been designed to simulate conditions similar to those at Arracourt. Rolling terrain, limited visibility, multiple approach vectors for the target vehicles. The M1 Abrams tanks that would serve as the opposing force were already in position at the far end of the range, their modern profiles a stark contrast to the vintage Hellcats. Sullivan thought about the men who would crew those Hellcats today. His veteran team, the Hellcat Legends, would command the lead vehicle equipped with the Longshot system. The remaining 4 vehicles would be crewed by regular Army personnel under Rodriguez's supervision, demonstrating conventional tactics as a control group. What had begun as a historical exercise had evolved into something far more complex, a high-stakes technology demonstration with international observers and hidden agendas. Yet at its core, the mission remained the same: to prove that the fundamental principles of tank warfare transcended technological evolution. With that thought firming his resolve, Sullivan descended from the tower and made his way to where his crew was assembling near the Hellcats. Johnson and Rodriguez were already in their combat uniforms, inspecting Vehicle 1 with the same meticulous attention they had shown decades earlier. Miller was reviewing medical protocols with the safety team, while Anderson was engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation with Harrison near the Longshot monitoring equipment. Gentlemen, Sullivan called, drawing their attention. Final briefing. The team gathered around him, joined by Werner, who emerged from the maintenance hangar, wiping his hands on a rag. The elderly archivist looked tired but alert, his eyes constantly darting toward Harrison and the monitoring equipment. The demonstration begins in 20 minutes, Sullivan informed them. We'll proceed according to the established protocol. Phase 1, mobility demonstration. Phase 2, stationary target engagement. Phase 3, simulated combat with moving targets. Vehicle 1 will test the Longshot system in all phases, with standard Hellcats providing baseline comparison. He looked each man in the eye before continuing. Whatever happens today, remember that our primary responsibility is to demonstrate the enduring value of the principles we fought by at Arracourt: speed over armor, maneuver over direct confrontation, crew coordination over technical superiority. And if the technical aspects go sideways, Anderson asked quietly, glancing toward Harrison's equipment, then we adapt and overcome, as we always have, Sullivan replied. Stay alert, follow protocols, and trust your instincts. If anyone observes abnormal system behavior, report it immediately. The men nodded, understanding the implicit warning. Despite all the preparation and safeguards, the long-shot system remained an experimental technology with potential for unexpected behaviors. Crew assignments, Sullivan continued. I'll command Vehicle 1 with Johnson as gunner, Anderson as loader, and Miller as driver. Rodriguez will coordinate the other 4 vehicles from the command center, maintaining communication links and ensuring tactical coherence. He checked his watch again. Foreign observers will be monitoring from the command center and designated observation posts. General Harmon and the Pentagon delegation will observe from the VIP platform near the firing line. This has become more than a historical exercise, gentlemen. It's a demonstration of American technological capability. Let's make it count. As the team dispersed to their assigned positions, Sullivan pulled Werner aside. A word, Doctor. The archivist seemed to brace himself. Yes, Colonel? You've been making adjustments to Vehicle 1 without authorization. Care to explain? Werner's expression flickered between guilt and defiance. Necessary safety precautions, Colonel. Dr. Harrison's calibration parameters exceed what I consider prudent limits. I've implemented additional stabilization protocols to prevent system resonance under dynamic conditions, without informing Harrison or Anderson. They would have objected, Werner admitted. Harrison because it constrains the performance envelope he wishes to demonstrate, Anderson because it contradicts the original documentation. Sullivan studied the older man carefully. These adjustments, do they affect the vulnerability exploitation capability you mentioned earlier? Werner hesitated, then nodded. They limit it. Keller designed the system with certain ethical constraints, built-in constraints that Harrison's modifications circumvent. My adjustments restore those limitations. Why shouldn't you? Sullivan pressed. What are you concerned might happen? The archivist glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard, then leaned closer. The long-shot system doesn't just identify vulnerabilities, Colonel. In its unrestricted form, it creates them. Harmonics, frequency manipulation, material stress points. It's not simply a targeting system. It's a weapon unto itself. Sullivan processed this revelation quickly, and Harrison wants to demonstrate this capability today. I believe so, yes. His monitoring equipment is designed to collect data on precisely these effects. Werner's expression grew troubled. The presence of foreign observers suggests a deliberate strategic decision to reveal this capability. What concerns me is whether everyone involved understands the full implications. Before Sullivan could respond, a staff car approached, disgorging General Harmon and Deputy Director Wallace. Both men wore expressions of grim determination as they made their way towards Sullivan. We'll continue this discussion later, Sullivan told Werner. For now, prepare Vehicle 1 according to approved protocols. No further unauthorized modifications. As Werner departed, Sullivan moved to intercept Harmon and Wallace, noting the tension between the two men. Whatever was happening behind the scenes, it appeared the military and intelligence communities were not entirely aligned. Colonel Sullivan, Harmon greeted him formally. Final preparations are complete? Yes, General. All vehicles are operational and ready for demonstration. Wallace spoke without preamble. There's been a development, Colonel. Our satellites have detected unusual activity at the Soviet testing ground near Kapustin Yar. They appear to be conducting their own demonstration today, coinciding with ours. Sullivan absorbed this information. That can't be coincidence. No, Wallace agreed grimly. Intelligence suggests they've accelerated their timeline in response to some leak about our exercise. They're demonstrating their version of the targeting technology to their own set of observers. Harmon's expression tightened, which means today's exercise has taken on additional significance. We need a successful demonstration, Colonel, one that clearly establishes our technological edge. The implication was clear. Failure was not an option. The long-shot system needed to perform as expected, validating American superiority in this crucial technology. Sullivan nodded acknowledgement, though internally he was recalibrating his approach. The stakes had just been raised significantly. What had begun as a historical exercise, then evolved into a technology demonstration, had now become a direct competitive response to Soviet activities. We'll proceed as planned, Sullivan assured them, though I should note that Dr. Anderson has registered some technical concerns about the system's calibration. Wallace waved this away. Minor details. The Pentagon has reviewed his concerns and determined they don't warrant postponement. The demonstration proceeds as scheduled. Sullivan exchanged a glance with Harmon, noting the general's slight frown. It seemed not everyone shared Wallace's dismissive attitude toward the technical concerns. "Very well," Sullivan said. "We begin in 10 minutes. I suggest you take your positions at the observation platform." As they departed, Sullivan made a quick decision. He found Rodriguez preparing to head to the command center and pulled him aside. "Change of plans, Michael. You're taking Vehicle 1. I'll coordinate from the command center." Rodriguez looked surprised. "James?" "Intelligence indicates the Soviets are conducting their own demonstration today. The stakes have been raised. I need someone I trust absolutely in that vehicle, especially if something goes wrong." Understanding dawned in Rodriguez's eyes. "You think Werner's warning about the system has merit? I think we're dealing with technology whose implications aren't fully understood, being pushed to its limits for political reasons." Sullivan's expression was grim. "Keep Anderson close. If the system behaves unexpectedly, he's the only one who might be able to contain it. And watch Harrison's monitoring equipment. Whatever data he's collecting is the real purpose of this exercise." Rodriguez nodded, his expression solemn. "Like Arracourt all over again, heading into fog against an enemy we don't fully understand." "Exactly. Except this time the enemy might be the very technology we're demonstrating." Sullivan clapped his old friend on the shoulder. "Good hunting, Eagle Eye." As Rodriguez headed toward Vehicle 1, Sullivan made his way to the command center. The large facility was buzzing with activity, technicians monitoring various systems, while military personnel coordinated the demonstration logistics. In one section, the foreign observers had assembled British, French, German, and Israeli representatives, each accompanied by technical specialists who were studying the preliminary data with evident interest. Sullivan found his position at the central command console, where he would have oversight of all 5 Hellcats during the demonstration. From here, he could monitor communications, track vehicle positions, and coordinate with the safety teams. A technician handed him a headset. "All vehicles report ready, Colonel. Waiting your command to begin Phase 1. Sullivan donned the headset and opened the communications channel. "This is Sullivan to all Hellcat crews. Confirm status." 5 acknowledgments came in rapid succession, the last from Rodriguez in Vehicle 1. "Hellcat 1, ready to proceed. System nominal." Sullivan took a deep breath, then gave the command that would set everything in motion. "Begin Phase 1. Execute mobility demonstration." On the testing grounds, the 5 Hellcats roared to life, their continental radial engines sending plumes of exhaust into the morning air. They pulled away from the starting position in perfect formation, accelerating rapidly toward the first waypoint. Sullivan watched on the tracking display as the vehicles reached their top speed of nearly 55 miles per hour, impressive for World War II vintage vehicles, though modest by modern standards. They executed a series of maneuvers, demonstrating the agility and responsiveness that had made the Hellcat such an effective tank destroyer. "Phase 1 proceeding normally," the technician reported. "All vehicles performing within expected parameters." Sullivan nodded, his attention fixed on Vehicle 1's telemetry. So far, the long-shot system appeared to be functioning normally, with no unusual power fluctuations or targeting anomalies. Perhaps Werner's concerns had been overstated, or his unauthorized modifications had successfully constrained the system's more exotic capabilities. As the mobility demonstration concluded, Sullivan gave the command to transition to Phase 2. "All vehicles, proceed to firing positions. Prepare for stationary target engagement." The Hellcats moved into position along the firing line, their gun barrels traversing to acquire the stationary targets positioned at varying distances. This phase would test basic accuracy and fire control, establishing a baseline before the more complex moving target engagements. "Hellcat 1 reporting ready for Phase 2. Rodriguez's voice came through the headset. "Long-shot system engaged and calibrating to targets." Sullivan watched the monitoring displays as the long-shot system came fully online. The power consumption immediately spiked, drawing more energy than the historical specifications had indicated. Harrison's modifications were clearly pushing the system beyond its original design parameters. "Power fluctuation in Vehicle 1, a technician reported. "Stabilizing now." Sullivan exchanged a glance with the technician. "Monitor closely. Any deviation beyond 10%, Alert me immediately. On the firing line, the Hellcats began engaging targets in sequence, their 76mm guns thundering across the desert. The conventional vehicles performed as expected, hitting their targets with reasonable accuracy given the age of the platforms and weapons. Vehicle 1, however, was demonstrating extraordinary precision. The long-shot system was calculating firing solutions that accounted for variables the original Hellcat crews could only have estimated: wind speed, temperature gradients, minute variations in shell weight and propellant. Each round struck dead center on its target. "Impressive," remarked one of the foreign observers, an Israeli brigadier general with a background in armor development. "The accuracy exceeds what should be possible with that vintage of gun and fire control." Sullivan nodded acknowledgement but kept his focus on the monitoring displays. The long-shot system was performing well, perhaps too well. Its power consumption continued to fluctuate, suggesting the targeting algorithms were doing more than simple ballistic calculations. "Phase 2 complete," Rodriguez reported. "All targets engaged successfully." Proceeding to Phase 3 positions. The final phase would be the most challenging and potentially the most revealing. The Hellcats would engage moving targets, including remotely operated M1 Abrams tanks equipped with training armor. This would simulate actual combat conditions, testing not only accuracy, but tactical effectiveness against modern armored vehicles. As the Hellcats repositioned for Phase 3, Sullivan noticed Harrison studying his monitoring equipment with intense focus. The naval researcher was collecting data, occasionally exchanging glances with his assistants. Whatever they were measuring, it clearly satisfied them. Sullivan opened a private channel to Rodriguez. "Michael, status check on the long-shot system." There was a brief pause before Rodriguez replied, "System functioning within parameters, though Anderson reports higher power consumption than expected. The targeting display is showing some unusual harmonic patterns when locked onto the Abrams targets." "Harmonic patterns? What kind?" "Anderson says they resemble resonance frequencies, though he's not sure what they're targeting. Possibly materials analysis of some kind." This aligned with Werner's warning about the system's more exotic capabilities. Sullivan made a quick decision. Reduce power to the long-shot system by 20%. Cite stabilization concerns if Harrison objects. "Understood," Rodriguez acknowledged. "Implementing now." Sullivan watched the power readings for Vehicle 1 drop to more reasonable levels. On the other side of the command center, he noticed Harrison frown as he observed the same change on his monitors. The researcher spoke rapidly to one of his assistants, who immediately began adjusting their equipment. General Harmon approached Sullivan's position, his expression concerned. "Problem with Vehicle 1. "Precautionary measure," Sullivan explained. "The long-shot system was drawing more power than recommended for sustained operation. We've reduced it to safer levels." Harmon nodded, though his eyes suggested he understood the unspoken concerns. "Wallace is pushing for a full capability demonstration. The Soviet exercise appears to be showcasing some impressive targeting technology of their own." "We'll demonstrate what can be safely implemented," Sullivan replied firmly. "Not theoretical capabilities that haven't been fully tested." Harmon seemed about to respond when an urgent call came through from the safety team. "Unusual electromagnetic readings from Vehicle 1. Possible interference with range safety systems." Sullivan immediately opened the channel to Rodriguez. "Hellcat 1, hold position. We're registering electromagnetic anomalies." "Confirmed," came Rodriguez's tense reply. "Anderson reports the long-shot system is generating unexpected harmonics, possibly due to interaction with Harrison's monitoring equipment. He's attempting to isolate the cause." Across the command center, Harrison was engaged in rapid conversation with Wallace, both men glancing frequently toward Sullivan. After a moment, Wallace approached, his expression a mixture of urgency and irritation. "Colonel, we need to proceed with the demonstration at full capability. The intelligence value of this exercise depends on demonstrating the system's complete performance envelope." Sullivan stood his ground. "Safety protocols take precedence, Deputy Director. We're registering electromagnetic anomalies that could affect range systems and possibly the target vehicles themselves." "Those readings are expected," Harrison interjected, joining the conversation. "They're part of the system's operational signature when engaging modern armor." "Expected by whom?" Sullivan challenged. "They weren't documented in the technical specifications provided to my team." Harrison's expression hardened. "There are aspects of the system's operation that were compartmentalized for security reasons. I assure you, the readings are within anticipated parameters. Sullivan was about to respond when General Harmon intervened. What exactly is this system doing to Harrison? Beyond conventional targeting, what capabilities are we demonstrating today? Harrison hesitated, glancing at Wallace, who gave a slight nod. The long-shot system, in its complete form, doesn't merely target physical vulnerabilities in enemy armor. It creates them through precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulses that affect specific materials and electronic systems. It's a directed energy weapon, Sullivan stated flatly. A precursor to one, Harrison acknowledged. Keller's original design was decades ahead of its time. With modern materials and computing power, we've been able to realize capabilities that were only theoretical in the 1940s. Sullivan processed this revelation quickly. And the Soviet system we're competing against? Based on the same principles, Wallace confirmed, intelligence indicates their Kapustin Yar demonstration today involves a similar technology, likely derived from Keller's work after he was captured in 1945. This new information changed the calculus significantly. If the Soviets were demonstrating an advanced targeting system based on the same principles, holding back the American version would create a dangerous misperception of technological parity or even Soviet advantage. Yet Sullivan couldn't ignore the safety concerns. We proceed, but with additional safeguards. The system operates at 80% power, not full capacity, and we maintain the option to abort if Anderson or the safety team reports anomalous behavior. Wallace looked ready to object, but Harmon spoke first. Agreed. This isn't a competition to see who can take the biggest risk. It's a demonstration of controlled, reliable capability. After a moment of tension, Wallace nodded reluctant acceptance. Very well, but the record will show that full capability was available if needed. Sullivan reopened the channel to Rodriguez. Hellcat 1, you are cleared to proceed with Phase 3 at 80% power. Maintain vigilant monitoring of all system parameters. Understood, Rodriguez replied, proceeding with Phase 3. On the testing grounds, the 5 Hellcats began moving into their engagement positions. The remotely operated Abrams tanks started their program movements, presenting challenging targets for the World War II vintage vehicles. Sullivan watched as the conventional Hellcats employed traditional tactics, using terrain for concealment, coordinating their movements to create crossfire opportunities. Their accuracy was impressive given the age of their weapon systems, but the limitations were clear. Against the speed and armor of modern tanks, they would have limited effectiveness. Vehicle 1, however, was demonstrating something altogether different. With the long-shot system guiding its targeting, it was consistently hitting vulnerable points on the Abrams targets with uncanny precision. More remarkably, the impacts were causing unexpected effects. Indicator lights on the targets were flickering, suggesting electronic disruption beyond what should have been possible from conventional rounds. The long-shot system is identifying electronic vulnerabilities in the target vehicles, Harrison explained, unable to hide his satisfaction. Even at reduced power, it's demonstrating the fundamental capability. Sullivan watched the readings carefully. Vehicle 1's power consumption remained elevated but stable, suggesting the reduced settings were containing whatever exotic effects the system was generating. On the testing ground, the demonstration reached its climax as all 5 Hellcats engaged multiple targets simultaneously. The conventional vehicles performed admirably, hitting their targets with reasonable accuracy. But Vehicle 1, guided by the long-shot system, achieved perfect strikes on critical vulnerability points, causing one Abrams target to completely shut down its electronic systems. Remarkable, commented the French observer. The precision exceeds anything in our current inventory. The Israeli brigadier nodded agreement. Particularly impressive given the vintage platform. One wonders what such a system could accomplish on modern equipment. That, Sullivan realized, was precisely the point of the demonstration. By showing this capability on a World War II-era vehicle, they were implicitly suggesting what might be possible with current technology. A powerful message to both allies and potential adversaries. As the final targets were engaged, Sullivan noticed an alarming spike in Vehicle 1's power readings. Hellcat 1, status report. We're showing power fluctuation beyond acceptable parameters. Rodriguez's response came through with audible tension. Anderson reports the system is generating unexpected harmonics. Harrison's monitoring equipment appears to be amplifying the effect. We're attempting to compensate. Sullivan immediately opened the channel to all vehicles. Phase 3 complete. All vehicles returned to staging area immediately. He turned to find Harrison already at his side, studying the readings with intense focus. The system is operating beyond its design envelope, the researcher admitted, possibly due to interaction with our monitoring equipment. We should shut down the targeting array immediately. Sullivan gave the order without hesitation. Hellcat 1, power down the longshot system completely. Switch to manual targeting only. Attempting shutdown, Rodriguez replied. System not responding to standard protocols. Anderson is implementing emergency cutoff procedures. Sullivan exchanged a glance with Harmon, who immediately began clearing non-essential personnel from the command center. The general understood the potential danger without needing explanation. What exactly is happening? Sullivan demanded of Harrison. The researcher's professional composure had cracked, revealing genuine concern. The system appears to be in a self-sustaining feedback loop with our monitoring equipment. It's generating harmonics that our instruments are amplifying and feeding back into the targeting array. Is there a danger to the crew? Harrison hesitated, then nodded. If the resonance pattern continues to amplify, it could affect electronic systems within the vehicle, potentially the crew's equipment as well. Sullivan opened all channels. Hellcat 1, evacuate immediately. Repeat, evacuate the vehicle now. For several tense seconds, there was no response. Then Rodriguez's voice came through, strained but clear. Negative, Colonel. Anderson believes he can stabilize the system, but needs to remain at the controls. Johnson and Miller are evacuating. I'm staying with Anderson. Sullivan felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. The same courage and dedication that had defined their service 4 decades earlier remained unchanged. Understood, Michael. What do you need from us? Harrison's monitoring equipment is causing interference, Rodriguez reported. We need it shut down completely. Sullivan turned to Harrison, who was already nodding. Shutting down now, all systems powering off. As the monitoring equipment powered down, Sullivan watched the readings from Vehicle 1 begin to stabilize. The power fluctuations decreased, then gradually returned to normal parameters. System stabilizing, Anderson's voice came through the channel, sounding exhausted but relieved. Implementing controlled shutdown sequence. Sullivan felt the tension in the command center ease as the danger passed. Around him, the foreign observers were being briefed by their technical specialists, all clearly impressed despite the near incident. From their perspective, they had witnessed a powerful demonstration of American technological capability, even with the unexpected complications. Hellcat 1 secure, Rodriguez finally reported. Longshot system powered down and isolated. No casualties or equipment damage. Sullivan released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Excellent work, Michael. You and Anderson showed exceptional courage. Remain in position until the safety team verifies all systems are secure. As the safety procedures were implemented, Sullivan found himself approached by Deputy Director Wallace, whose expression suggested he considered the demonstration a success despite the complications. Impressive performance, Colonel, Wallace said. Even at reduced power, the system demonstrated capabilities that will send a clear message to our Soviet counterparts. Sullivan wasn't in a mood to celebrate. It also demonstrated potentially dangerous instabilities. This technology isn't ready for field deployment, regardless of what the Soviets may be claiming. Perhaps, Wallace conceded, but today's demonstration accomplished its primary objective. Our allies have seen what we're capable of, and our adversaries will soon know as well. The intelligence value alone justifies the exercise. Before Sullivan could respond, General Harmon joined them. The Pentagon is pleased with the outcome, despite the technical issues. They're particularly interested in Dr. Anderson's stabilization protocols, which apparently succeeded where previous attempts had failed. Sullivan absorbed this information. So Anderson's concerns about Harrison's calibration were valid. The system was indeed operating beyond safe parameters. It appears so, Harmon agreed, which raises questions about why those parameters were approved in the first place. Both men looked at Wallace, who had the grace to appear uncomfortable. The parameters were consistent with intelligence assessments of Soviet capabilities. We needed to demonstrate matching or exceeding those capabilities, even at the risk of endangering American personnel, Sullivan stated flatly. Wallace had no response to that, and after a moment excused himself to coordinate with his team. As he departed, Harmon turned to Sullivan with a more personal expression. Your crew performed exceptionally, James, particularly Rodriguez and Anderson. Their quick thinking prevented what could have been a serious incident. Sullivan nodded, pride evident in his expression. They're the best, always have been, though I suspect this wasn't quite the historical validation exercise we originally discussed. No, Harmon admitted. It evolved into something more complex, but in its own way, it did validate your core principles. When the technology began to fail, it was human skill and courage that prevented disaster, not automated systems or advanced electronics. This observation struck Sullivan as profoundly important. Despite all the technological advancements of the past 40 years, the human element remained the critical factor in success or failure. The lesson of Arracourt had been demonstrated once again, though in a manner no one had anticipated. As the safety team completed their work and the Hellcats were secured, Sullivan made his way to Vehicle 1, where Rodriguez and Anderson were debriefing with the technical specialists. Both men looked exhausted but satisfied, the bond of shared danger evident in their interaction. Colonel Lee Rodriguez greeted him. Quite an exciting conclusion to our historical exercise. Sullivan smiled wryly. Not exactly what we had in mind when we started, but educational nonetheless. He turned to Anderson. Your stabilization protocol saved the day, Sparky. The Pentagon is apparently very interested in how you accomplished what their experts couldn't. Anderson shrugged modestly. Just applied some old-school engineering principles to a new problem. Sometimes the simplest solution is the most effective. A lesson worth remembering, Sullivan agreed. He lowered his voice. What exactly happened with the system, in layman's terms? Anderson glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard, then explained. The long-shot system was designed to identify and exploit vulnerabilities in enemy armor through precise harmonics. Harrison's modifications pushed it beyond its design limits, creating a feedback loop with his monitoring equipment. Essentially, the system began targeting itself, generating increasingly powerful resonance patterns. Could it have been weaponized? Sullivan asked. Used deliberately to create such effects? Almost certainly, Anderson confirmed grimly. With the right calibration, it could potentially disable electronic systems at considerable distance. Werner's concerns were valid. This goes beyond conventional targeting technology. Sullivan processed this information thoughtfully. And yet, you were able to stabilize it using relatively simple countermeasures. Every system has its vulnerabilities, Anderson replied, even one designed to exploit vulnerabilities in others. There was a profound lesson in that observation, Sullivan realized. No technology was invulnerable, no advantage permanent. The cycle of measure and countermeasure would continue, as it always had throughout military history. As the debriefing continued, Sullivan noticed Werner standing apart from the others, watching the proceedings with an unreadable expression. The elderly archivist had been notably absent during the crisis, though his unauthorized modifications to the system had likely prevented even more serious complications. Sullivan approached him. Your additional stabilization protocols may have saved lives today, Doctor, though I'm still not certain of your role in all this. Werner offered a tired smile. My role has always been the same, Colonel. To ensure that Keller's work was understood properly, with all its implications and limitations. You knew him personally, Sullivan stated, making it clear this wasn't a question. Werner hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I worked with him briefly before his disappearance, enough to understand his concerns about how the technology might be applied. And your unauthorized modifications to the system were consistent with Keller's original safety parameters, Werner confirmed. Parameters that Harrison's team chose to override in pursuit of maximum performance. Sullivan studied the older man carefully. You could have spoken up, insisted on your safety concerns more forcefully. Would anyone have listened? Werner asked pointedly. The demonstration was driven by intelligence concerns, not technical considerations. My modifications were my insurance policy, implemented quietly to avoid objection. There was wisdom in this approach, Sullivan had to admit. Sometimes achieving the right outcome required working within a flawed system rather than confronting it directly. As the day's activities concluded, Sullivan gathered his veteran crew for a final briefing away from the official debriefing sessions. Johnson and Miller had joined them, having been evacuated from Vehicle 1 before the crisis peaked. Gentlemen, Sullivan began, today didn't go exactly as planned, but it achieved something important nonetheless. It demonstrated that the principles we fought by at Arracourt still apply, even in this age of advanced technology. Speed, surprise, and adaptation, Rodriguez agreed. Plus the human element, the willingness to improvise when systems fail. Johnson nodded, his deep voice resonating with conviction. Machines break down, plans go awry, but good soldiers adapt and overcome. Always have, always will. Miller, the medic-turned-physician, offered his perspective. What impressed me most was how quickly the younger technicians responded during the crisis. They've never seen combat, yet they performed admirably under pressure. The knowledge transfer worked. This observation struck Sullivan as particularly significant. Beyond the political and technological aspects of the exercise, they had accomplished something more fundamental, passing hard-earned wisdom to a new generation. The lessons of Arracourt, learned in blood and fire 4 decades earlier, had been transmitted to young soldiers who would never experience that historic battle firsthand. So what happens now, Anderson asked. With the long-shot technology, I mean. It clearly has potential, but also significant risks. Sullivan considered the question. That decision is above my pay grade, but based on today's performance, I suspect it will undergo substantial refinement before any field deployment is considered. The conversation continued as the sun began to set over the Mojave Desert, painting the landscape in deepening shades of orange and purple. The 5 Hellcats stood silent sentinels in the fading light, their day's work complete, their place in history further secured by this unusual resurrection. General Harmon found them there as darkness fell, approaching with uncharacteristic informality. Quite a day, gentlemen. The Pentagon is already analyzing the results. Despite the technical issues, they're considering the exercise a significant success. Sullivan nodded acknowledgement. And the Soviet demonstration? Concluded without incident, according to our intelligence. Their system apparently performed as expected, though without quite the precision demonstrated by ours even at reduced power. Harmon's expression suggested satisfaction with this outcome. So the message was sent, Rodriguez observed. American technological superiority maintained. For now, Harmon agreed, though the gap may be narrower than we'd like to admit. The general hesitated, then continued with what seemed to be carefully considered words. The Pentagon has authorized me to offer commendations to each of you for your exceptional service today. Particularly you, Anderson, for your quick thinking during the system crisis. Anderson shrugged modestly. Just applying the principles Colonel Sullivan taught us years ago, nothing special. On the contrary, Harmon replied, your actions prevented what could have been a serious incident with international observers present. That alone merits recognition. Sullivan watched this exchange with quiet pride. Despite their differences over the years, Harmon still recognized and valued the fundamental principles that had defined their service together. There's something else, Harmon added, his tone becoming more formal. The Pentagon is establishing a new research unit focused on vulnerability assessment and countermeasures, building on what we've learned from the long-shot technology. They've asked me to extend an invitation to each of you to serve as consultants. The veterans exchanged glances, surprised by this unexpected development. Even us old dogs? Johnson asked with a grin. Especially the old dogs, Harmon confirmed. Your experience proves invaluable in moderating technological enthusiasm with practical wisdom. Today demonstrated that clearly. Sullivan considered the offer. After a career spanning multiple conflicts and technological evolutions, the opportunity to shape future developments held genuine appeal. Not for personal advancement or recognition, but to ensure that the hard-learned lessons of combat were not forgotten in the rush toward technological solutions. I'll consider it, Sullivan said, speaking for himself, though suspecting his crew would follow his lead. Though I'd need assurances that safety and ethical considerations would take precedence over performance metrics. Harmon nodded understanding. I anticipated that concern. It's been explicitly incorporated into the unit's charter, based on lessons learned from today's exercise. As the discussion continued, Sullivan found himself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a historical exercise had evolved into something far more significant, a bridge between past and future, connecting the lessons of Arracourt with the challenges of modern warfare. The 5 Hellcats, silhouetted against the deepening twilight, symbolized that connection. Though they would soon return to museums and historical collections, they had served one final mission, demonstrating that while technology might evolve, the fundamental principles of warfare, the human elements of courage, adaptability, and teamwork, remained constant. When the time came for the crew to depart, Sullivan remained behind, walking alone among the silent vehicles. He paused at Vehicle 1, placing his hand on the cold metal that had once again been in the center of action, just as it had been 40 years earlier in the fog of Arracourt. "Still got some fight left in you," he murmured, echoing his words from days earlier, "just like the rest of us." As Sullivan turned to leave, he noticed Werner standing nearby, watching him with an expression of understanding. "They never really leave us, do they?" the archivist said quietly. "The machines we fought in, the battles we survived, they become part of who we are." Sullivan nodded, recognizing the truth in those words. "You were there, weren't you, at Arracourt, not as an archivist studying it later, but as a participant?" Werner hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, though on the other side. I was a young engineer assigned to a Panther battalion, captured after the battle and eventually recruited for my technical knowledge." This confirmation of Sullivan's suspicion was less shocking than it might have been days earlier. In a strange way, it completed a circle, bringing former adversaries together in common purpose after decades of Cold War tension. "Your modifications to the long-shot system," Sullivan said, "they weren't just about safety, were they? They were about ensuring the technology was used responsibly." "Keller believed that such power required ethical constraints," Werner confirmed. "He built them into his original design. I merely restored what others had removed." Sullivan considered this, then offered his hand to the older man. "Whatever your past, your actions today help prevent what could have been a serious incident. Thank you." Werner accepted the handshake, his expression suggesting the gesture held deeper significance than mere courtesy. Perhaps this is how old warriors should conclude their service. Not in continued conflict, but in ensuring that the lessons of our experience guide those who follow. As they walked together toward the waiting vehicles, Sullivan found himself in rare agreement with a man who had once been his enemy. The true value of their experience, of the battles they had fought, and the hardships they had endured, lay not in victory or defeat, but in the wisdom gained and passed to future generations. Operation Arracourt Redux had begun as a historical exercise and evolved into a complex technology demonstration. But its most significant achievement had been neither historical nor technological. It had been human, the bridging of generations, the transmission of hard-earned wisdom, the recognition that behind all the machinery of war stood men and women whose courage, judgment, and adaptability remained the decisive factors in victory. As Sullivan departed Fort Irwin that evening, he carried with him a renewed sense of purpose. The war he had fought in his youth was long over, but the struggle to ensure its lessons were not forgotten continued. In that ongoing mission, the Hellcat legends had achieved one final, meaningful victory.